Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Robb the Firth. Robb's time in Riverrun had been anything but uneventful. Ever since the Battle of the Camps, where the Northern Force routed the Kingslayer's army, the men of the Riverlands had been trickling into Riverrun by the hundreds. Robb's council had also expanded as well, including seasoned veterans such as Jason Mallister, Tytos Blackwood, and Janos Bracken. Roose Bolton had also returned from his lost battle at the Green Fork with what remained of his 2,000 men. Robb's first stop after relieving the castle was his grandfather's chambers. Hoster Tully, Lord of Riverrun, would have been a great addition to Robb's war council, a man with just as much experience as the great Tywin Lannister. Unfortunately, Hoster's health had been slowly declining over the last few years, and he had been bedridden ever since the beginning of the siege, a shell of the man he once was. It was a terrible sight to see, especially for Robb's mother, who had taken to staying by her father's side ever since she arrived at the castle. Robb had spoken briefly to his grandfather, but didn't have much time for his grandfather, as he was currently in the middle of a heated war council. With the combined might of the Riverlands and the North, some 37,000 men, the lords were at odds with what to do. Some, mainly the Northmen, wanted to continue south and bring the fight to Tywin Lannister, on their way to save Robb's father. The Riverlords, especially the younger lords led by Edmure Tully, wanted to head into the Westerlands and take revenge on the lands and people of Tywin Lannister. Robb's uncle was who Robb expected him to be. For a man nearly a decade older than his nephew, he didn't seem to be taking the war all that seriously. He had been very vocal about his want to raid the Westerlands, but Robb suspected it was more so to gain glory and gold rather than any want for revenge. "Ned is still a prisoner in King's Landing," the Great Jon growled. "We go south." That was the clinching point for the argument. No one wanted to say that rescuing Eddard Stark wasn't the aim of the entire campaign. A man respected by both parties, both as a man and a warrior. He was also the good son of Hoster Tully. There were arguments to be made for attacking the Westerlands and bringing the fight to Tywin at Harrenhal, but there was no counterpoint whenever the debate fell back to saving Robb's father. Robb scratched his beard, a scruffy thing that the young lord had been growing since he had left Winterfell, months ago. It was nothing compared to beards Rickard Karstark or the Great Jon sported, but Robb liked his. He felt it made him look older than he was. "Who else are we waiting for?" he asked his council. "The Freys have finally assembled their force and are a few days away." Sir Brynden grunted. 4,000 men under the command of Stepheron Frey. "Took their fucking time," Sir Mark Piper grunted from down the table. The fact that the Freys were answering the Tullys' call to arms was surprising for all present, but the good feeling was quickly dissipating with how long it was taking for their force to arrive. Robb had heard a few of the old jokes about House Frey resurfacing amongst his allies, and hoped that they would stop before Stepheron and his men arrived. He would be greatly annoyed if he lost thousands of important men because of a thoughtless word. Robb ignored the comment. "We'll wait for them to arrive, then we'll head south and deal with Tywin." "Surely, nephew, we can still attack them on two fronts. We have more than enough men to attack the Westerlands and rescue Ned," Edmure pointed out. Robb nodded. "True, but our goal is not to cause further death and carnage, uncle. We currently have the advantage of numbers over the Old Lion and we cannot waste it." Edmure nodded, falling silent once more. Robb looked over his council, making sure that all the others understood him as well. He looked at his great-uncle, who was looking at Robb with a mixture of approval and respect. "What happened to the Lannister men that fled during the battle?" he asked. "They've buggered off back to the Golden Tooth," the Blackfish answered. Robb had placed the wily veteran in charge of scouts, and so far it had proven to be a good idea. Robb nodded. "While we wait for the Freys to arrive, I want riders sent out to clear the way. I don't want Lannister deserters hindering us." "A sound move, my lord," Lord Janos Bracken praised. "I will personally see it done." "Go no further than Highheart and regroup with us as we pass," Robb ordered. "After that we'll strengthen the forward scouts and clear the way ourselves." All the lords nodded. When dealing with a commander like Tywin Lannister, who is highly intelligent and has decades of experience under his belt, Robb couldn't afford to be thinking about nuisance raids. Better to deal with them before they could happen. "Is there anything else I should know?" Robb asked. Both Renly and Stannis Baratheon had proclaimed themselves kings. Lord Blackwood said, leaning forward. Stannis has also sent out messages across the realm revealing the true parentage of Joffrey. Robb smiled grimly. He had learned of the message when he first arrived in Riverrun, and had a good laugh over it. Joffrey's parents were in fact Jaime Lannister, and his sister Cersei, the two following the old and illegal Targaryen tradition of incest between siblings. It all made sense now. There was always something off about Joffrey. The boy was a little unhinged. It also made sense as to why none of Cersei's children looked like their supposed father. They all had blonde hair and green eyes, while Robert had black hair and blue eyes. There's been worrying reports about Stannis, Lord Bracken added, eager to add his own opinion. He's turned to a foreign religion and now has a red priestess as an advisor. A few of the Northerners muttered darkly. They were followers of the old gods, while the Riverlords were followers of the Seven, the main religion of Westeros. Besides the religion of the drowned god in the Iron Islands, all other religions were usually rebuked and quickly died out in Westeros. Robb knew that red priestesses were usually associated with R'hllor, one of the many deities that existed in Essos. Robb frowned. He knew his father would tell him to support Stannis, since he was technically Robert Baratheon's heir, but the fact that the man has turned to a new religion bothered him. "We'll deal with the Baratheon brothers later," he said finally, shaking his head. "We do not declare for anyone. Our only enemies are the Lannisters." "Anything else?" When no one spoke, Robb dismissed them. "Lord Bracken, take a few hundred riders and clear the way forward. That will be all for today. We will meet again when the Freys decide to join us." The lords chuckled as they filed out of the room. It had not taken long for Robb to take command of the mixed group of lords. The Riverland lords had all heard of how Robb had dealt with the Kingslayer and his men, and it was an understatement to say they were all impressed. They had smartly fallen in line alongside their northern counterparts, who were now firmly devoted to the young wolf. Robb was about to leave as well when he noticed Sir Brynden still sitting at the table. He looked more grim than usual. "Is everything all right?" he asked, frowning. "Two men arrived earlier today," he said. "They wanted to meet you." Robb's frown deepened. "Why is this the first time I'm hearing of this?" "Your mother recognized one of them and had the young man thrown in the dungeon while the other was detained to a room," the old knight explained. "It was your half-brother Jon, and his friend Samwell Tarly." Robb shot to his feet. "Jon's here?" he asked angrily. "Why wasn't I told?" "Your mother thought he was a deserter of the Night's Watch and had him arrested. I took his companion to his room. He told me that Jon and he hadn't taken the black when they left." Sir Brynden went on. "Your mother didn't feel like you should be told, stating that you were too busy. I feel differently, hence why I am telling you now." Robb sighed, leaning over the table. He usually trusted his mother's judgment, and he had proven that when he had her treat with the Freys, but she tended to be overdramatic when it came to Robb's brother. She never could get over his birth, and Robb never figured out why. "Jon's in the dungeon?" he asked quietly. "He is," was the answer. "I'll get him myself. Can you have his companion brought to my grandfather's solar?" "I want to speak with them both privately," Robb said. "Don't tell my mother about this. She won't understand." Sir Brynden raised an eyebrow but nodded. "She's sitting with Holster currently, but I'll make sure you aren't disturbed." "Thank you, Uncle," Robb said before walking off to retrieve his brother from the cells. "Robb," Sir Brynden called after his great-nephew, causing the young man to turn around. Jon's companion mentioned a message. "Did you receive one?" Robb cursed silently before nodding. "I got it the night before my mother met with Lord Frey." "Why did you not tell anyone?" Sir Brynden asked curiously. "You were there when Jon arrived. You saw how she reacted." "I was. That's why." "You're sure that he's not a deserter?" "I'm certain of it," Robb answered firmly. "Why?" "Because the same man raised us." With that, Robb turned and left. Once he rescued Jon and spoke with him, he would then have a long talk with his mother about who was in control of the army. This was her home, but if someone came looking for Robb, it was not her place to interfere. But one problem at a time. Line brave. Robb, accompanied by Greywind, descended into the dungeons. It was a large, damp, dark room under the castle. The cells were 3 thick walls of slimy river rock, with the 4th wall being a set of iron bars set so close together that only a beggar's arm could fit through. The room smelt of unwashed bodies and fish guts, reminding the young lordling of his visit to White Harbor. When Robb entered, there was some movement in the cell to his right. Robb recognized the person instantly, a slight smile coming across his face. He walked up to the cell, facing his brother for the first time since he had left for the Wall. He had changed in some ways, and in others he hadn't. His hair was pulled back in a knot, and he had the beginnings of a beard like Robb. Besides that, he still looked like Jon. He still insisted on wearing black and had a slightly confused but resolute look on his face. "Got yourself into a bit of trouble, it seems," Robb joked. Jon grinned. "Just a bit," he agreed, laughing slightly. Robb looked around the cell. "Where's Ghost?" "He's with Sam," Jon answered before adding, "Sam is my friend who came with me. I don't know where he is." Robb shook his head. "He'll be waiting for us. I sent men to get him," he said, unlocking the door. "Now come on, we need to talk. I'm sorry for the way my mother acted." Jon shrugged, leaning down to rub Graywin's head. "It's all right. She did what she thought was right." Robb shook his head. "I am in control here. Anyone who comes looking for me should be brought to me. There's no room for excuses." Jon raised an eyebrow. He had never heard his brother like this before. It was still Robb, but there was a tone of command in his voice that reminded Jon of their father. A tone that made others know Robb was in command and his orders were to be followed to the letter. "If you're in the mood for mercy, I would very much like it if you let me out too," the Kingslayer quipped from where he was sitting against the wall. Robb frowned. "You're staying in there for a long while, Kingslayer," Robb answered. "I'm half tempted to take your head for incest." Something flickered in the knight's emerald eyes. "What are you talking about, boy?" Robb smirked. "Stannis Baratheon revealed your dirty secret to the realm. You fucked your sister and sired children with her," he snarled. "Besides killing Targaryens, it seems you prefer fucking like them too. You have no proof besides the word of Stannis Baratheon, a bitter man who hated his brother," Sir Jaime argued. Robb raised an eyebrow. "So, the fact that all three of the royal children look like you and that Joffrey seems to be a sadistic prick means nothing. The man you killed, you recreated with your sister." Sir Jaime glared at the two but said nothing. His anger was palpable in the room. Robb shook his head, a disgusted look on his face. "You could have been great, but all you can do now is watch as your already tarnished reputation falls even further." Robb snarled before he strode out of the room. Jon right behind him, the two young men leaving the disgraced knight to fester in his thoughts. Inside Hoster's Solar, a young man and the Blackfish were casually talking. The young man was fat. No amount of clothes could hide that. He had two things in his hands, one of which was a weapons belt. He had a pudgy pale face with dark, stringy hair, and a patchwork, scraggly beard. He seemed pleasant enough though. When Robb and Jon entered, a smile of relief came over the fat boy's face. "Jon," he said happily. Ghost flashed across the room and circled Jon's legs, making sure he was all right before he went over to Greywind, the two playfully nipping at each other. Jon returned the smile. "Sam, thank you for holding those for me," he said, taking back his belt before clapping Sam on the shoulder. "I want you to meet my brother, Robb." Sam turned and bowed to Robb. "It's a pleasure to meet you, my lord." Robb waved aside the greeting. "Call me Robb," he said kindly. "Any friend of Jon's is a friend of mine." The Blackfish nodded. "I'll take my leave. I have two of my most trusted men right outside the door. They'll make sure you aren't interrupted." Robb nodded. "Thank you, uncle." The Blackfish bowed slightly and strode out of the room, closing the door behind him. When they were alone, Robb walked over to the small table on the side of the room and grabbed a tray bearing a few hunks of bread and a small bowl of salt. He held it out to the two men. "Bread and salt," he offered. Both Jon and Sam grabbed their piece, sprinkled it with salt, and ate it. With the guest rite established, they all sat down. Robb sat behind the desk while Sam and Jon sat across from him on the other side. "Right, get on with it," Robb said, gesturing for Jon to start. Jon nodded, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. "The Night's Watch was not what I thought it would be," he began. "It was full of criminals, to put it bluntly. I began to doubt whether I wanted to stay there or not. When I heard of Father's imprisonment, I struck out that night with the intention of helping you save Father. Sam joined me. He was the only one who was kind to me at the Wall. The night I was leaving, he approached me and asked to come with me. He was bullied worse than I was, and we knew he wouldn't last long without me. And neither of you took the black," Robb clarified. Jon nodded. "We were a day or two away from taking the black, but we never took it," he answered. "Please believe us, Robb. We are not deserters. We're brothers. I would never shirk my duty, not if I had taken an oath." "And you're vouching for your friend as well?" Robb asked, glancing at Sam. Jon nodded again. I am. If I may, my Robb, Sam said. We stopped at castles in the north on our way south. If we were deserters from the Watch, we would have been executed by now, or the Lord Commander would have sent men to bring us back. Robb raised an eyebrow. The large lad may not be a warrior, but he certainly was intelligent. The thought never even crossed Robb's mind that others would have stopped the two on their way south. Now that it was brought up, it made sense how Sam and Jon made it this far. Fair enough, he conceded. Go on. We stopped by Winterfell and saw Bran and Rickon. Both are doing well. Jon continued. When we crossed the Neck, we were visited by Lord Reed and brought to Greywater Watch. That's where things get odd. Odd? Robb asked curiously. Jon nodded seriously. Robb, what I have to say cannot leave this room. What I was told by Lord Reed could cause untold chaos and death to a lot of people. I need your promise that what is said here never leaves this room. Robb raised an eyebrow. He glanced at Sam, who looked just as serious. Surely, Jon, it's not that, he began, but Jon cut him off. Robb, Jon said sharply, I need your word, please. The heir to Winterfell nodded. I promise on my honor that anything you say will never leave this room. Jon relaxed a little. You remember Robert's rebellion, what father did after he relieved the Tyrell siege? I do, Robb answered. He went to Dorne and came back with Aunt Lyanna's remains. Jon nodded. Father fought 3 of the Mad King's Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy, where his sister had remained during the rebellion. After the fight, he found his sister clinging to life. In her final moments, Aunt Lyanna explained what had happened and made our father promise something. To protect her child. Robb's eyes shot open. Child? We have a cousin? Jon grimaced slightly. According to Lord Reed, who was the only surviving member of Father's companions, Lyanna said that she went willingly with Rhaegar when he came looking for her. She wanted freedom from her betrothal to Robert Baratheon, and she thought she could get that from the Bard Prince. The two went into hiding in Dorne. When her brother and father were killed in King's Landing, Lyanna wanted to leave, but Rhaegar wouldn't allow her. Robb frowned. Why did he go after her in the first place? The man was married to Ilya Martell. He had children? Sam nodded. That's true, but Rhaegar needed something from your aunt, he said, taking up the story. Lord Reed told us that in Rhaegar's later life, he became obsessed with an old prophecy, a song of ice and fire. He thought he had it figured out, and he needed your aunt to make it come true. Targaryen and Stark, ice and fire. So he was mad, just like his father, Robb surmised. Sam nodded slightly. A different kind of madness, he corrected. Rhaegar probably thought what he was doing was for the best. But that doesn't excuse his actions. You mean taking another man's betrothed? Robb said. Jon shook his head. It gets worse. When Lyanna wanted to leave, Rhaegar didn't allow her. He had his Kingsguard hold her down while he got her with a child, he said grimly. Arthur Dayne was the only one who was not involved in the crime, as he was away when it happened. Robb gripped the armrest. He raped her, he hissed angrily. With his Kingsguard. So much for being the most honorable knights in all the fucking realm. They broke their knightly vow to uphold their Kingsguard oath, Sam said quietly. They may have been honorable men, but after that day, they no longer were. What happened to the child? Robb asked, calming down slightly. Jon grew quiet, looking down at his hands. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Robb raised an eyebrow and looked towards Sam, who simply shook his head. Jon needs to be the one to say this, he said simply. Robb nodded slowly and looked back at his brother, who had finally found the strength to go on. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly, but he had a resolute look in his eye. On her deathbed, Lyanna asked our father to name the child. Give him an honorable name. Father chose Jon, after Jon Arryn. Robb frowned. What are you saying? He asked quietly, a sick feeling seeping into his gut. Jon looked his brother in the eye, his gray eyes meeting Robb's blue ones. I am the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, Jon said quietly. Robb didn't know how to react. He wanted to shake his head and laugh, thinking this was all a big joke. On the other hand, he wanted to punch Jon in the face for making such a statement. That can't be true, Robb said finally. You're my brother. We grew up together. We did, Jon agreed. Robb, Rhaegar is not my father. He did not raise me. The children of Ilya Martell are not my siblings. You are. You and Arya and Bran and Rickon and Sansa. You are my family. Robb nodded. So why did father call you his bastard? Lord Reed said he did to protect both Jon and his sister. Sam explained. Lord Stark was afraid King Robert would kill Jon for being the son of Rhaegar Targaryen. He tarnished his honor to save the reputation of his sister and to keep me safe, Jon added. Robb sighed and leaned back in his chair. Certainly is something father would do. So what does this mean for you? He asked, looking at Jon. Jon shrugged. I don't want the throne, he said firmly. I just want to be me. I want to be Jon. Robb smiled slightly. Aye, that's a good idea, he said. Exactly the sort of thing I expected from you. Is that why you want to keep all this a secret? Because you don't want to be known as a Targaryen? Jon nodded slightly. That's part of it. If I come out as the last remaining son of Rhaegar Targaryen, who knows what might happen? Some lords might raise their banner in support of me. Others might try and kill me for it. No, I don't want anyone else to die for me. Robb tapped the desk. Fair point, he said, glancing at the parcel in Sam's lap. Anything else I should know? Are you hiding a dragon somewhere? Jon smiled at the joke. He was glad to see that Robb had accepted the story so well. He was fearful that Robb might send him away, or even worse, kill him because of it. But Robb felt the same as Jon. They were brothers, and that would never change. I don't have a dragon, but I do have something else that's been lost for quite some time, he said, unsheathing his sword and placing it in front of Robb. Robb looked down at the blade, his mouth dropping open. He looked back at his brother. Where the hells did you get Valyrian steel? The maester at Castle Black gave it to me, Jon explained. At the time, I wasn't sure why. Lord Reed suspects that it's Dark Sister, as the last person to wield it was Bloodraven. He must have left it with the maester, who's also a Targaryen, when he vanished north of the wall. Sam and I agree. Does he know that you're secretly a Targaryen? Robb asked. The maester, I mean. Jon shrugged. I'm not sure, but that's not all. Sam unwrapped the parcel in his lap, revealing what was underneath the packaging. It was an ornate bastard sword, with a ruby on the pommel and a gold steel crossguard. The sheath was red and black. Robb looked at both Jon and Sam before glancing at the metal. He quickly connected the dots. Blackfire, he said, crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair. Jon nodded. Lord Reed and father found it when they found Lyanna. The only logical assumption is that Rhaegar found it, and left it there for his heir to wield in case he fell in battle. But why didn't he wield it in battle? Robb asked. That very well could have saved him when he fought Robert Baratheon on the Trident. Jon shook his head. I'm not sure, he admitted, but Lord Reed kept it with him all this time. Father didn't want rumors spreading if he returned to Winterfell with a child and a Targaryen heirloom. Fair point, Robb grunted. I want you to wield one, Jon continued. Robb looked up quickly. But they're yours, he argued. Jon smiled slightly. Robb, I can't wield both at once, he joked. There's no reason for weapons such as these to go unused. Robb chuckled, picking up Dark Sister, getting a feel for the sword. Finally, he nodded. All right, I wield Dark Sister. I like the irony of you wielding Blackfire. Both Sam and Jon laughed. Jon pulled the empty sheath from his belt and passed it to Robb before grabbing the larger blade. After sliding the sword into his weapons belt, he nodded to the sword Robb still had in his hand. I had Mikken change the crossguard and pommel. I didn't want anyone guessing the sword, he explained. He patted the large ruby pommel on his new sword. I'll have the same done to Blackfire. Robb nodded. We probably shouldn't call them Blackfire and Dark Sister either, he pointed out. Jon nodded. True, Blackfire will be Frost. Robb raised an eyebrow. Frost was the name of the weapon Stark kings wielded before they began using ice. This will be Claw, he said, coming up with the name on the spot. Robb had never got the chance to wield ice, so he had never gotten the chance to feel Valyrian steel in his hands. It was amazingly light. After a moment, Robb sheathed the sword and leaned it against the desk. The trio sat in silence for a while, not sure what to say. The conversation about Jon's heritage and the swords was finished. Finally, Robb broke the quiet. Well, that was an interesting conversation, he joked, pouring himself some wine. Both Jon and Sam chuckled as well. I guess that's that, Jon said. Sam shifted in his seat. Robb, may I ask a favor? Robb nodded. If I can help, I will. I would like, Sam stuttered. Sam, what's wrong? He asked, looking at his friend. Sam had been quiet for a few days, and Jon was beginning to wonder if he was finally going to find out. I want to go to the Citadel, Sam said, turning to look back at Jon. I want to train as a maester. You need an escort, Robb said. The mountain was rampaging through the lower riverlands. It would be unsafe for anyone to travel that way. Sam nodded. Yes. Jon shook his head. So you're just going to leave? Sam smiled sadly. Jon, you said it yourself. This is war, and it's not fit for someone like me. I like to learn. I like to read. This, he said, gesturing to the sword at Jon's side, isn't me. I'm no use to you here. Jon shook his head quickly. You can't leave Sam. You could become a healer. I'm sure Robb can find you a place in the army. Robb, who had decided to stay out of the conversation between friends, simply nodded in response. But Sam shook his head. Would that be best for you, or for me? He asked bluntly, catching Jon by surprise. Jon, words cannot describe the friend you have been to me, and I will always think of us as the best of friends, but I need to do this for me. Jon looked at Robb looking for an ally, but Robb was nodding in agreement with Tarly. Robb respected Sam's desire to do something for himself. He understood the want to keep friends close, but he also knew that it was important for men to do what they think is best. It was obvious that Sam had his mind set on becoming a maester, and that it hurt him just as much as it did Jon to leave. You want to do this? Jon asked quietly. I want to make something of my life, Sam responded with a hint of steel in his voice. Jon nodded slowly. Then I will not stand in your way. Robb smiled. I can provide you an escort of 10 men to help you get to Old Town, he promised. I look forward to seeing what becomes of you, Samwell Tarly. Sam smiled back. My father tried to force me to become someone I wasn't. I now can choose my own path. Hopefully it's safer than the one Robb and I must now take, Jon said, looking at his brother. The Kingslayer said that there are other lions on the prowl. Let us see how they fare against a pack of wolves. Robb smiled fiercely. Dire wolves. Robb the sect. Robb sat with his council, which now included additions such as his mother, Theon, and Jon. At the other end of the table, nearly shaking with nervousness, was a messenger from King's Landing. He wore red and gold clothing, with Joffrey's idiotic sigil of a prancing stag and lion facing each other on his tunic. In his hands he fiddled with a scroll. The council had been a rushed affair. Robb had just a long and arduous conversation with his mother. Flashback. Mother, Robb said quietly as his mother entered. After he had spoken with Jon and Sam, he had Ser Brynden help them get rooms and food before he sent a servant to fetch his mother. Robb? Catelyn said curiously, closing the door behind her. Her eyes were slightly red-rimmed and her usually tight braid had become a little loose. She still held herself with the dignity of a noble woman, but there was slight fraying at the seams. Is all well? Robb crossed his arms, leaning against the front of the desk. His face was like a slab of stone, hard and unreadable. I just finished talking to Jon, Robb answered, glaring at his mother. Catelyn frowned. You had him thrown in the dungeons when he came looking for me, Robb barked, just barely holding his anger back. You had no right to do that. Robb's mother sighed. I know what you were trying to do, and I say again that you had no right to do that. Robb said, cutting off his mother again. Do not forget your place here, mother. I am in charge of this army, and when someone comes looking for me, this should see me. I will not have my mother cutting my legs out from under me. I was protecting you, Catelyn said angrily. That bastard could have been here to stick a knife in your back, Robb scoffed. Mother, you have spent close to 16 years around Jon. When have we ever been anything less than best friends and brothers? I will tell you, never. Robb, Catelyn said. We don't know if he's a deserter or not. Robb shook his head, picking up a raven message from off the desk, waving it in front of his mother. You're wrong, Robb said, hating the words as they came out of his mouth. I received this message from Jon when we were still on the eastern side of the Twins. He sent it from the last hearth. Jon also stopped at Winterfell and moat Kaelin on his way here. If he was imprisoned then, he had no right to be imprisoned here. Catelyn was shocked. You never told me you received a message. Would your reaction be any different? Robb asked sadly. You would have told me that same thing you're telling me now. Jon is dangerous, do not trust him. I know you, mother, and I know your irrational fear of my brother. Catelyn opened her mouth to answer, but Robb stopped her. The young lordling had played out this interaction in his head, while he had waited for his mother to arrive. He knew what he needed to say to his mother, and although he didn't want to say it, he knew it was necessary that she knew. I will not tell you this again, so listen carefully. Robb started, his voice like iron. Jon is here to stay. You will not send him away. You will not belittle him, and you will never refer to him as a bastard. Is that understood? Catelyn seethed. I'm still not sure we can trust that him. How do you know that he's not a deserter? Because the same man that raised me raised him, Robb growled. Before Robb's mother could respond, there was a knock at the door. My lord, there is a messenger from King's Landing. Theon's voice came through the door. The War Council has assembled. We'll be right there, Robb called back, pushing himself off of the desk, and striding out of the room. He stopped right before went past his mother. I love you, but this is not the time nor place for your emotions to rule your decisions. With that, Robb left. Flashback. What does Joffrey want? Robb asked gruffly, glaring at the man. The man gulped nervously, glancing around the table before opening his scroll, clearing his throat. The man knew that he was in the proverbial lion's den, or wolf den in his case. By order of his grace, King Joffrey Baratheon, King of the Andals, Rhoynar, and First Men, Lord of the... He started before the Great Jon interrupted him. Get on with it, man. We don't give two shits about the boys' titles. The large lord growled. The man nodded quickly, his eyes glancing fearfully at the giant man before looking back at his scroll. His King Joffrey has sent me to inform Robb Stark that his father, Eddard Stark, has been beheaded for treason against his lawful king. Furthermore, House Stark is no longer recognized as Lord Paramounts or Wardens of the North, and are hereby stripped of Winterfell and their lordly status. The man said, working hard to keep his voice from quivering. For his entire life, the messenger had been told that Northmen were savages, and he was fearing that the news of Eddard Stark's death might send them into a frenzy. The news hit the group like an avalanche. Lady Stark choked back a sob as she leaned on her uncle, who wrapped an arm around his niece, consoling her. The other lords were in various states of grief. The Northmen barely held their anger in check, their sadness turning to fury, while all the lords of the Riverlands shared the same mask of sadness and grief. Even Jon and Theon, who had never gotten along, shared a pale, mournful look. Eddard Stark had treated them both like sons, and they felt the loss just as deeply as Robb did. Robb's glare broke as the news washed over him, and he struggled to keep his composure. He stood slowly, slamming his fist on the table. Get the hell out of here, he growled. Tell Joffrey that if he wants to take my home, then he can pick up a sword and face me on the battlefield. The messenger bowed slightly and practically ran from the room, eager to be away from the young wolf and his men. When he was gone, Robb sunk back into his chair, still struggling to keep tears back. For a moment, no one spoke, all thinking deeply on the news that had just been given. Robb's father had been a man unlike any other, a beloved man by both the commoners and nobles, a respected warrior and man who was renowned for his honor and honesty. It took a great man to be loved like Eddard Stark was in the north, but to be equally loved in both the Riverlands and the Vale was unheard of outside of men who wore crowns. What do we do now? Sir Mark Piper asked, quietly to no one in particular. We should declare for a king, Lord Bracken offered sadly. Renly is the best option. He has the support of the Reach and the Stormlands. Don't be daft. Lord Blackwood snapped, his sadness turning to ire. Stannis is the only lawful claimant to the throne. The younger brother cannot inherit the throne before his older brother. Slowly, the Riverlords became embroiled in a debate of which king to support, Renly or Stannis. Renly was backed by two kingdoms, the Stormlands and the Reach, which made him a very powerful player on the field. Stannis, as Lord Blackwood had mentioned, had the rightful claim as he was Robert's true heir now that Joffrey's true parentage had been revealed. Finally, a roar brought the argument to a halt as the Great Jon erupted from his seat, slamming his fists on the table. Who gives a fuck about some southern king? He challenged. What do they know of me and my kin, of the harsh winter that my people suffer through while they sit on some pointy throne under the sun? What do they know of the Wolfwood or the Wall? Even their gods are wrong, he bellowed, getting a few gruff laughs from the likes of Mage Mormont and Rickard Karstark. The large lord drew his sword and pointed it at Robb. There sits the only man I'm willing to bend my knee to. Robb Stark, the king in the north, he declared, kneeling before the young wolf. Lord Rickard stood next. Aye, the Great Jon has the right of it. Why take another king when we can have one of our own? He said, drawing his sword and kneeling. The king in the north. Theo stood as well. Am I your brother? Now and forever? Now and forever, Robb answered firmly. Theon drew his sword and knelt next to the Great Jon and Karstark. My sword is yours in victory and defeat. One by one the other lords knelt before Robb, swearing their loyalty to him as the king in the north. Robb watched them all with a steady gaze, not sure how to react to their declarations. Finally, Jon was the only one still sitting. He stood up slowly, looking at his brother. "I traveled across the north to be by your side. There is no man in all of Westeros more deserving of the crown," he said, drawing his sword. "You have my sword, my life, and my undying loyalty," he declared before he too took a knee. The great Jon took up the call once more. "The king in the north! The king in the north! The king in the north! The king in the north!" Line break. It had been a few days since Robb had been declared king, and in that time a few changes had happened. A crown had been crafted by the blacksmith at Riverrun based on a description found in the castle's library. A circlet of bronze engraved with runes of the first men. 9 black iron spikes in the shape of longswords were surmounted on the bronze. It was beautifully crafted and the perfect crown for the king of the hardy and fierce Northmen. Another thing that has changed was how people address Robb. Instead of my lord or Lord Stark, more people had begun to refer to Robb as your grace, or sire. It was a weird change that the young man was still getting used to. The only people who didn't refer to Robb by his titles were Jon, Theon, and his mother, but they only referred to Robb by name whenever they were in private. Robb was slightly overwhelmed by it all, but he was quickly adjusting to the change. Thankfully, Theon and Jon still jested with him, just as they did when they were all still boys in Winterfell. Now Robb and his council were trying to decide what to do now that Lord Stark was dead. He had been the focal point of their war, and with him gone, they couldn't just sit at Riverrun with 37,000 men. Soon food would run out, the men would begin to squabble amongst each other. An army had to be kept busy, it had to have a purpose. "The Lannisters think that they are untouchable," Edmure said, addressing the group. "I say we give them the same treatment they've given our people." Once again, the fiery heir to Riverrun was pushing for Robb to invade the Westerlands, in retaliation for what the Mountain and his raiders had done to the southern Riverlands. This time, however, he had more support. Sir Mark and Lord Vance still backed Edmure, but now Lords Bracken and Blackwood were too. Robb looked at the Blackfish, who was watching his nephew with an exasperated look. The young king leaned over to the old knight while Edmure continued to press his case to the council. "Any reports from the Westerlands?" he asked. Brynden nodded grimly. "There's a host assembling behind the Golden Tooth. That's all my men could find out," he said. "They must have stripped garrisons to the bone to make any sort of real army." Robb frowned but nodded. He stood up, quickly taking the attention off Edmure and onto himself. "You make a good point, uncle," Robb said easily. "The Mountain's actions will not go unpunished, but I fear we cannot win this war ourselves." A roar of disapproval rose from the side of the table where the northern lords sat, but Robb raised his hand to calm them. "Your Grace, we have the advantage of numbers against the Lannisters," Lord Glover pointed out. Robb nodded at him. "We do, but what about Stannis? What about Renly? We have no reason to go to war with them, and I have no wish to sit my arse on the Iron Throne," he explained. "We can hasten this war if we choose one of them to ally with. A southern king who will accept our independence." "Your Grace, Renly is the man you want," Lord Mallister said. "I've spoken with him many times. Stannis's will is like iron and he will not allow 2 kingdoms to succeed from Westeros. Renly is more likely to do so." Robb looked around at his council. Any argument against Lord Mallister's statement? "The man's a pillow biter," Lord Bracken grumbled. Robb shook his head. "I don't care about the man's sexual preferences, my lord. I care if he'll acknowledge our independence." No one spoke up for Stannis or against Renly. "Then it's settled," Robb said. "We'll treat with Renly and come to terms. He can keep the Vale, the Reach, the Stormlands, Dorne, and the Iron Islands. The North and Riverlands are under my control." "What of the Westerlands?" Lord Bolton asked. Robb shook his head. "I haven't decided. For now, any land we conquer, we keep." A low cry of approval erupted from the table of lords. The Westerlands were known for its mines rich with silver and gold that could make any man very wealthy. One of the best mines was beneath Casterly Rock, and while that may be too far out of Robb's grasp, there were still others that were less defended and much closer. "Who will treat with Renly?" Jon asked. Robb thought for a moment before looking at the Blackfish. "Uncle, I am leaving you in charge of the men," he said. "Deal with the Lannister host, and take the Golden Tooth. Anything after that I leave to your judgment." The Blackfish nodded. "It will be done," he promised. "What will you be doing, Your Grace?" Lord Vance asked curiously. "I will meet with Renly Baratheon and make sure we get our independence," Robb answered. "What about Tywin?" Jon asked. Robb shook his head. "He can't move, not with both Stannis and Renly poised to strike at the capital." For a moment Robb glanced at his right towards his mother, then he realized she wasn't there. Since the news of his father's death, she had become reclusive, only appearing to have meals with Robb and his commanders. Every other moment she spent in her room, the Sept, or with her father. She had also taken to wearing black every day, mourning the loss of her husband. Robb had tried to console her, but his attempts had been unsuccessful. Ideally, his mother would have been his first choice to treat with Renly, but Robb couldn't send her away from her home, not when she needed to be here most. It fell on the young wolf to speak for his family and kingdom. "When do you leave?" Lord Hawker asked. "Tomorrow," Robb answered. "The sooner I can come to an agreement with Renly, the better." "Your Grace," Theon said, speaking up, "if I may, give me leave to go speak with my father. He has the greatest fleet in Westeros. We can crush the Westerlands between us." Many on the council shifted in their seats, sending dark looks at the young Ironborn, but Theon ignored them all and kept his eyes locked on Robb. The young monarch thought for a moment before nodding. "Give your father an offer. If he rejects it, return to me. Do not waste your time or breath," Robb said. Theon grinned, nodding happily. "Thank you, my lord." Robb smiled slightly and looked back at his council. "I'll take 3 guards with me. Small Jon, Dacey, and Darren. That'll be more than enough." Jon looked up when he realized that Robb didn't say his name, but he didn't say anything. "That will be all for today, my lords," Robb said. "If all goes well in the Reach, then this war will be over by the end of the year, and we will have avenged my father's wrongful death." Jon found Robb in the courtyard talking to Theon. The two were joking as Robb's guard mounted up and prepared for the journey. From what merchants were saying, the youngest Baratheon brother was marching very slowly towards King's Landing, and was currently camped out at the grassy vale. Robb Council had been surprised with how slowly the younger Baratheon was moving. With 100,000 men under his banner, he could end the war within moments. But he was taking his time, camping for almost a week, if not more, before moving on. It was very perplexing and aggravating to Robb and his commanders, who were actively bringing the fight to the enemy. Theon, on the other hand, was heading northwest towards Seaguard, where he would take a ship to Pike to treat with his father. Jon had heard a lot of grumbling from the likes of Lord Hawker and Lord Mallister about the fact that Theon was being sent home. They didn't trust the Greyjoy, and for good reason. Both families had dealt with Ironborn raids for generations. There were centuries of bad blood built up in all parties. But Robb had held firm in his decision. Jon had spoken to him privately about the matter, and his brother's reply had been in typical Robb Stark fashion. "Theon grew up with us in Winterfell. He felt our father's death just as keenly as we did. Do not worry, Jon. He will not let us down." Jon, still a newcomer to Robb's council, had let the discussion end after that, not feeling that it was his place to try and counsel Robb on the matter. If his brother felt like Theon could be trusted, then that was enough for Jon. "Jon," Robb called, beckoning him over. "I trust Eddard have spoken to you?" Jon nodded. With Robb heading south, he had placed Eddard Stark in control of the battle group in his absence. At Robb's request, the Stark boy had approached Jon and asked him to fight with the others during battle, which Jon immediately accepted. What he wanted now more than anything was to prove himself to the others. He had a chance to rise about his bastard name, and he was going to throw himself into it with everything he had, no matter what it meant. "He spoke to me," Jon answered. "Are you prepared to meet with Renly?" Robb nodded. "As well as I can be. Lords Bracken and Mallister have advised me on what Renly might say." "Do you think he'll agree?" Jon asked. "He'd be foolish not to," Theon answered arrogantly. "We're winning the war." Robb shook his head. "We've won 2 battles, my friend. There is still a long way to go." Jon crossed his arms. "We should have a plan if Renly decides not to recognize Robb's claim." Robb patted Jon on the arm. "Agreed, but I won't think about that till I hear it come from Renly's mouth." Jon turned to Theon, sticking his hand out. "Good luck," he said respectfully. "Hopefully talks with your father go well." Theon looked surprised by Jon's gesture. The two hadn't always gotten along when they grew up together in Winterfell. Jon resented Theon for getting Robb in trouble and his general arrogant attitude, and Theon felt like he was above Jon's bastard status. The only thing they shared was their close relationship with Robb. He was the glue that kept the group together. But after Jon's time at the Wall, he realized that Theon wasn't too bad of a person. He was cocky, but he had always treated Robb and the other Stark siblings like his own. Theon clasped arms with Jon. "Thank you," he said. "I wish you good fortune in the battles to come." Robb grinned. "It only took me leaving and half of the realm to be at war for the two of you to finally make peace with each other," he joked. Robb embraced Jon, slapping him on the back before similarly embracing Theon. When he stepped back, he held them both at arm's length. "If we can make allies with Renly and the Iron Islands, then we will bring the Lannisters to their knees. After the war, I promise you that I will find positions for both of you in my court." Theon grinned. "Somewhere in the south where the whores aren't frozen would be nice," he joked. Jon smiled as well. "We won't let you down, Robb." Robb nodded. "I know," he said, patting the two on their shoulders once more before mounting up. At his signal, his small group of warriors fell in behind him as they rode out of Riverrun, heading south. Theon nodded to Jon, mounting up as well. He was being escorted by a small group of Mallister soldiers who would make sure he got a ship to Pike before returning to their lord here at Riverrun. "Don't take all the gold, Snow. Make sure to leave some for the Ironborn," he said. Jon grinned. "There's plenty to go around. Just try not to sink." Theon laughed and clapped his spurs into his horse, riding out the same way Robb did, leaving Jon alone in the courtyard. "Line break, Jon," Sir Brynden said, walking up behind the young warrior. Jon had just finished lunch and was walking to the square to spar. He hadn't had much time on the journey south to practice, and Sam certainly couldn't help him. Thinking of Sam, Jon had been sad to see him go. The large boy had left the morning the messenger from King's Landing had arrived, escorted by 10 Stark bannermen garbed in leather armor, steel helms and dark cloaks. When Sam had walked out of the keep, he seemed to have a spring in his step. He still looked a little nervous, but it was an exciting sort of nervousness. He was ready, if a little scared, to start a new phase of his life, one that he had control over. Their goodbye had been awkward, as neither were able to fully articulate their sadness of the other leaving. After the promise of writing letters and potentially seeing each other again, Sam struggled into the saddle and began his journey surrounded by his protectors. As soon as they were out of the gate, Jon raced up to the battlements and stood there until the group was out of sight completely. It was tough for Jon to see Sam go. They had forged a bond during their time riding through the north during the many nights and days they spent together. They had shared their pasts, a few of their secrets. Jon had tried to teach Sam how to fight, and in turn, Sam had taught Jon a few things too, mostly history. Jon and Robb were brothers, but he had formed a similar bond with Sam, one that he would cherish and hold on to until the day came that they met again. Jon turned, slightly bowing to the knight. "Sir Brynden," he greeted cautiously. Jon had made sure to keep a wide berth of the Tullys. Hoster Tully had at first been angry that Jon had been allowed into his castle, a walking symbol of shame for his favorite daughter, but both Robb and Brynden had talked down the ailing lord, telling him that Jon had arrived to serve Robb. Besides Jon's initial encounter with Lady Stark when he had first arrived at the castle, the two hadn't been close enough to make contact with one another. Jon had taken his meals at the far ends of the tables, surrounded by squires and hedge knights, while Robb and his mother had eaten with the other lords and ladies at the high table. It was probably best that Jon kept his distance from the Lady of Winterfell. With Robb leaving and the death of Lord Stark, the last thing Jon wanted was to anger Lady Stark in any way. The poor woman had dealt with enough emotion for the last few days. The knight nodded to Jon. "Where are you off to?" "The practice yard," he answered respectfully. "Want to make sure my sword arm hasn't gotten rusty." Sir Brynden nodded. "I'll accompany you. I am curious to see your skill." Jon nodded and the two walked out into the yard, where the remaining members of Robb's battle guard were practicing with some younger nobles. When Jon and Sir Brynden exited the keep, a few looked up and nodded to the duo. "Uncle, come to spar?" Edmure Tully asked, his chest heaving as he halted his fight with Patrick Mallister. Sir Brynden shook his head. "I've come to see how the boy fights," he said, jerking a thumb towards Jon. Edmure laughed, gesturing across from him. "Come on then, lad. Let's see what you got." Jon glanced at the others, who were watching him with varying degrees of curiosity. They all knew Robb was a good warrior, above average, to be sure. They were all curious to see if Jon was as well. Jon pulled his sword from his belt and leaned it against the wall before grabbing a blunt practice blade from the rack. He stepped into the square, swinging the sword to get a feel for the weight. After wearing Valyrian steel, he needed to readjust himself to heavier steel. When Jon had a feel for his weapon, he dropped into his stance, holding his sword in front of him with both hands. Edmure simply smirked and got into his stance, holding up his shield and laying the flat of his blade on the top edge. "No shield, Snow?" "Don't use one," Jon replied, keeping his eyes locked in on Edmure's. One of the first rules Sir Roderick had taught him was to watch his opponent's eyes. They would give the first indication of an attack. With a grunt, Edmure leaped forward, thrusting at Jon, who reacted on instinct. He parried the blade and stepped to his left. Finding himself behind Edmure, he lashed out at the exposed back, but Tully swiftly turned and brought his shield up, stopping the attack. He was no longer smirking and had a look of fierce determination on his face, probably mirroring Jon's own. He charged forward again, keeping Jon in front of him as he pushed the bastard back. Jon parried all of Edmure's strikes, stepping back and out of the way whenever his opponent tried to shield charge him again. The two went around and around the yard, Edmure following Jon like a bull after a red flag. Jon continued to bide his time. Edmure was a good swordsman, but Jon realized pretty soon into the fight that he was better. Now, he was just allowing his opponent to tire himself before Jon took over. After a few minutes of Edmure's all-out attack, weariness had taken hold of the auburn-haired man, slowing his attacks. Taking the power out of them, Edmure realized this too late, and tried to disengage. Taking a few steps back, but Jon was on him in an instant. The bastard of Winterfell stepped forward, his sword coming down at his opponent's head. Edmure brought his shield up to block the attack, and cursed quietly as he felt the power of the strike. Jon was not as tired as Edmure, and he showed it now. Jon's sword came alive in his hands, as he drove Edmure back in a flurry of attacks. His sword a spinning wheel of light. The heir to Riverrun did all he could to defend, but he was just barely getting his sword or shield in place, before Jon struck another undefended part of Edmure's body. He struck at the arms, legs, torso, head. It was like fighting a kraken, and each of the 8 arms had a sword. Finally, Jon simply beat the sword out of Edmure's hand and leveled his blade at the man's throat. Both fighters were breathing heavily, but it was easy to tell that Edmure was breathing more heavily. After a moment, the two men nodded, and Jon dropped his sword back down to his side, leaning on it. Edmure shook his head tiredly. "Not bad," he admitted, holding out a hand. "You fight well, Lord Edmure," Jon said, grasping arms with the man before they walked towards the others. Edmure chuckled. "Not as well as you. I should have known that you were waiting for me to tire myself out." Jon shrugged. "Just timing," he said awkwardly. Edmure patted Jon on the back. "Perhaps," he said, walking off to get some water. Jon turned back to find the other members of the battle guard looking at him. They all had wide grins on their faces. Eddard Stark stood up, his practice sword in his hand. He smiled fiercely. "Up for another bout?" "Line break." That night, Jon sat with the battle guard, joking and talking like they had known each other for years. Jon had sparred with nearly every member of the group, beating most of them. The only one to beat him was Sir Wendell Manderly, but Jon was dead tired after facing the likes of Eddard Stark, Brandon Hawker, and Sir Perwyn Frey. Even still, Jon's skill with a blade and humility after winning had won over the group of nobles. Even Sir Brynden, who had strangely stayed to watch all of Jon's bouts after he defeated Edmure, looked at him with a small amount of approval and respect, something that spoke volumes to Jon. "Jon, do you think King Robb will come to an agreement with Renly?" Owen Norrie asked as he tore into half a chicken. Jon shrugged. "I'm not sure. I hope they can. If Lord Bracken is right, then we know what we get with Renly. Stannis and his foreign god worry me." "Why should we care about the bugger?" Brandon Hawker asked gruffly, his platter filled high with meat and bread. On either side of the second son were his brothers, Ian and Eric. The 3 Hawker brothers were all different and unique. Eric Hawker was tall and muscular, and shared his father's ability to easily take command of a situation. Ian Hawker was shorter than both his brothers, with iron-like muscles in his arms and back, built up after years of using a longbow. The third son of Roland Hawker used a Blackwood longbow with a massive draw weight that many men struggled with. But not Ian. Jon had seen him use the bow when the Hawkers had visited Winterfell for feasts in the past. The lad had calmly hit the bullseye after bullseye from distances that staggered Jon. The second son of the War Eagle was a mountain of a man, bigger and tall than his father and brothers. Well over 2 meters tall, full from foot to head with muscle and brawn, he was the very image of what a northerner was to most of Westeros. In training he wielded a massive double-bladed battle axe, with frightening ease. Jon doubted that he could hold the axe for a few minutes, and the man seemed to never tire with it in his hands. Jon would count himself lucky to have any by his side in a fight. Because a young Stannis Baratheon held out against impossible odds when under siege by the Reach during Robert's Rebellion, he also defeated the Ironborn on the waves off Fair Isle during the Greyjoy Rebellion. Not an easy task, I tell you, Sir Brynden said, walking up to the group. He is a very dangerous man, and if he's become a fanatic to some red god, then we best keep our eye on him. Sir Brynden, what do we owe the pleasure? Lucas Blackwood asked curiously. I need Jon for a moment, the Blackfish said, gesturing for Jon to follow him. Jon raised an eyebrow but got out of his seat to follow the older knight. Sir Brynden led Jon out of the hall and through the castle before arriving at Lord Hoster's Solar. Sir Brynden unlocked the door and pushed it open. In, he said. When Jon walked in, Sir Brynden closed the door behind him and stood in front of it. Jon turned to look at him, feeling uneasy with the knight's manner. Have I done something? Jon asked. Sir Brynden shook his head. You're a curious person, Jon, he said, walking over to a small table where a pitcher of wine and 2 cups were sitting. He poured himself a cup and glanced at Jon. Wine? Jon shook his head. No, I'm all right. Sir Brynden shrugged. Fine, he grunted, taking a deep drink. Do you know why I asked you here? Jon shook his head. I don't. I was intrigued to see you fight. Sir Brynden explained. When Edmure challenged you, I was curious to see how you would react. When I saw you fight, I was mildly impressed. Jon shifted slightly. Thank you, he said awkwardly. Sir Brynden scoffed. You did well in the yard, lad, but have you ever been in a real battle? With the prospect of death all around you? He shook his head. Survive that first, then we'll see. Jon was now truly confused. Forgive me, Sir Brynden, but what did you want to talk to me about? Sir Brynden frowned, taking another drink of wine. Ned Stark is the most honorable man I've ever met, he said. When he married Cat, the thought never crossed my mind that he would have a bastard. With his older brother Brandon, there was a chance that it could happen, but Ned never was the type. But here you are. Jon sighed, another person who would blame him for a birth he had no control over. Sir Brynden, he began, but the Blackfish cut him off. Save your breath, lad, he said. I have no problem with your birth. I've been a soldier for more years than you've been alive. I've seen men hundreds of miles from their home and families give in to the temptation of a night with a stranger, someone to take their mind off death and chaos. I've seen men in your position, bastards, who have risen above their name to make something of themselves. I know Cat resents you and has told me as such, but you've proven to be a humble, respectful young man who has proven to be quite skillful. Jon reddened slightly. Thank you, Sir Brynden. Sir Brynden nodded slowly. After I saw you beat Edmure, I thought you got lucky. You fought like a man twice your age. Perhaps it was your own natural ability. Robb is a very good fighter, just as Ned was. Not a natural, but certainly well enough to hold his own against any man. You have natural talent. The way you swing your sword, the way you move, the way you read your opponent. It reminds me of a man I knew a long time ago. He died 20 years ago. Jon's breath caught in his throat. There was no way the Blackfish knew who his father was. Certainly not by the way he fought. Who? Said Arthur Dane. Sir Brynden grunted. The man was an artist with the blade. Fast, powerful, agile. He was the Mad King's most dangerous Kingsguard, with the possible exception of Ser Barristan. I then remembered a rumor going around at the tourney of Harrenhal, a potential courtship between a shy northerner and a fiery lady-in-waiting. Jon gave a mental sigh of relief. He had no idea that Jon was Rhaegar's son. He shook his head, faking disbelief. Sir Brynden, what are you trying to say? It never made sense to me that Ned would sully his marriage to Cat with a bastard. That is, unless he had the child before his marriage. Sir Brynden explained. The Danes have always been natural swordsmen. It makes sense that the son of Ashara Dane and Ned Stark is the same. Jon opened his mouth but nothing came out. He looked down at his boots, trying to think of something to say, but Sir Brynden beat him to it. You don't have to say anything, lad, he grunted. I've always wondered why Ned did what he did. After seeing you fight, it all makes sense. Jon nodded slowly. I understand, he said quietly. Sir Brynden, I would ask that you don't tell anyone this. Sir Brynden nodded. It's your story. Yours alone to tell. I wanted to let you know that I know. Jon nodded. Thank you, Sir Brynden. I appreciate that. Sir Brynden drained the last of his wine, walking out of the room. Best get a good night's sleep. We ride tomorrow morning towards the Golden Tooth. We have work to do. Tyrion. I want him dead. A hysterical voice cried as Tyrion waddled into the small council chambers, his hired bodyguard Bronn at his back. Inside, his nephew Joffrey was pacing and ranting. The other members of the council sat in silence around the table, while the boy's mother tried to calm the boy king down. Joffrey hadn't changed much since Tyrion last saw him at Winterfell, except for the damn crown on his head. He was still tall for his age, with curly blonde hair and reasonably handsome features. He was dressed in red leather, his personal banner of a prancing stag and roaring lion stitched out with gold thread on his right breast. He wore a half-cloak of black and gold hanging off one shoulder to pay homage to his father's family. His crown was a slim gold circlet encrusted with sapphires. Tyrion never cared for his sister's eldest. He was cruel and stupid, with a quick and abrupt temper that caused him to do quite a few things that made Tyrion found, to a point, sadistic. For instance, Tyrion once had a conversation with Robert Baratheon during the feast of some tournament, and as always the Fat King was complaining about his family, one of 3 topics he always talked about. The other 2 were war stories and the loss of Lyanna Stark. The drunk king had told Tyrion about a time where Joffrey had cut open his brother Tommen's pregnant cat to see the unborn kittens inside. The boy hadn't even been 10 name days. It was that story that always made Tyrion weary of his nephew. He did not fear him. Tyrion knew that Joffrey was craven at heart. But Joffrey was now king, and there was no telling what the boy might do with the power he wields, especially since his mother seemed to have little to no control over her son. Peace, my dear. Robb Stark will be dealt with, Cersei promised. Even after birthing 3 kids, Cersei Lannister was still a strikingly beautiful woman. With golden hair, sparkling emerald eyes, fair skin, and a slender, graceful figure, there was a reason she was known as the most beautiful woman in all of Westeros. Most, upon catching sight of the woman, would agree with the sentiment, but Tyrion had the unfortunate honor of knowing the woman. She was spiteful and arrogant and had more pride than her late husband had bastards. Her only redeeming quality that Tyrion was willing to admit was that she loved her children more than anything else in the world. Quite right, Tyrion said, walking over to his sister, who looked both surprised and angry to see him. Uncle? Joffrey said, obviously surprised to see him. What the blazes are you doing here? Tyrion ignored his nephew, planting a kiss on Cersei's cheek before pulling out a chair for himself, jumping up onto the seat. When he was seated, he pulled out a scroll from his belt and tossed it towards Cersei before pouring himself some wine. Cersei broke the wax seal and quickly read the message, her eyes narrowing before she looked at Tyrion. You lie, she growled. Tyrion shook his head. Father cannot leave the field, not while the Stark boy is still in the Riverlands. He's proven surprisingly dangerous for his young age. Grandfather should fight him and be done with it. Joffrey spat in annoyance. He's supposed to be the greatest commander in Westeros. He is, Cersei said, defending her father. Tyrion nodded. Do not forget, nephew, there are still your uncles who we must deal with. One with 100,000 men. You still never said why you are here, Lord Tyrion, Grandmaster Pycelle sputtered. Tyrion looked at the old man, giving him a forced smile. He wasn't an idiot. He knew that his father had Pycelle in his pocket. He's been there since before Robert's rebellion. Anything that happened that could potentially harm the Lannister cause in King's Landing was told to Tyrion's father by the old man. With my father currently indisposed, I am here to take his place as hand to the king, Tyrion said casually, taking a drink of wine. The small council was the group of individuals who advised the king, led by either the king or their hand. Unfortunately, the war had taken a toll on the already small group of people. Renly, Baratheon, and Stannis were gone, leaving the positions of Master of Laws and Master of Ships vacant. There was one other position that was vacant that Tyrion noticed instantly. Where is Ser Barristan? He asked, looking at his nephew. Joffrey scowled. I sent him away. Tyrion raised an eyebrow, glancing at his sister, who looked too nonchalant. If this was one of her plots, which it probably was, it was a truly stupid one. He turned his attention back to his nephew. Please tell me he's away on some sort of mission. Joffrey looked at him like he was stupid. I dismissed him from my Kingsguard. He let my father die. He's too old to guard anyone. Uncle Jaime is now my Lord Commander. Tyrion sighed. He would need a lot more wine than he realized if he was going to be dealing with his foolish sister and her equally foolish son. You do realize that the man is the most respected and famous knight in all of Westeros. Tyrion gritted out. Not to mention he's one of the most dangerous fighters alive. What if he decides to serve one of your uncles? Thousands will flock to their banner. Joffrey waved aside his uncle's words. The old man's probably dead by now, he argued, killed by some bandits. And what of your new Lord Commander? Do you know where he is? Oh, right. In the dungeons of Riverrun. Tyrion scolded before taking a breath, calming down. What else should I know? It seems Robb Stark has placed a crown on his head as well. The Master of Spies Varys simpered quietly. He has been named king in the north, supported by the lords of the north and the Riverlands. Varys was an interesting person, and one that was truly dangerous. He was a plump, bald eunuch from Essos, who had started as the Mad King's spy master, always adorned in silk smelling of lavender and rosewater. The fools of the court didn't always take the man known as the Spider seriously. But Tyrion was no fool. He was potentially the deadliest man in all of Westeros. Traitors, Cersei growled. Tyrion turned on her, raising an eyebrow. He wouldn't have put a crown on his head if his father was still alive. He pointed out, shooting a dark look at Joffrey as well. Regardless, my father will deal with him in due time. Renly and Stannis are our bigger problems. What have we done to prepare the city for an attack? We have been saving food, Pycelle mumbled. For the citizens? Tyrion asked, surprised that such an order had been given. For the nobles, the ones who need it. Cersei answered, the peasants will have to survive on their own. Tyrion sighed again, shaking his head. Much more wine was needed. What about defenses? What of the gold cloaks? Do we have enough men to fend off an attack? The Valyrian City Watch is currently keeping order in the city. The Master of Coin, Pettier Baelish, answered easily. The Queen Regent's order to preserve food for those in the Red Keep has not been popular. So I've seen, Tyrion muttered, remembering the destroyed shops he had noticed on his way to the keep. People were desperate and hungry. It was a small wonder that the Red Keep hasn't been stormed and sacked for food already. If you have anything in mind, Lord Tyrion, please share, Varys said gently, leaning back in his chair, hiding his hands inside his wide sleeves. Tyrion thought for a moment. Whatever Crownlander lords are still loyal to us, have them assemble their men and march to Duskendale. We cannot afford to bring them into the city, but they will be close enough to help should we need it. Who will lead them? Pycelle asked. Lord Renfred Riker, Tyrion answered firmly. The Lord of Duskendale was a decent warrior and man, loyal to the crown and bluntly honest. Tyrion had seen him participate in a few tournaments at the capital. He had represented himself well. Should they not go and join father in the Riverlands? Cersei asked stupidly. Tyrion shook his head. That'll leave the city defenseless, and without the city Joffrey can no longer be king. That is something we are trying to avoid, he explained, speaking to his sister as one spoke to a child. Now what else? We are 6 million in debt, Baelish said, a slight smirk on his face. Tyrion was close to clawing out his eyes. Who are we indebted to? The Master of Coin didn't even have to glance at his books. Oh, the Tyrells, the Faith, and a few others. Our largest debts belong to House Lannister and the Iron Bank. Tyrion tapped his glass thoughtfully. Well, I have an idea. Fantastic, my lord, what might it be? Baelish asked with mock amazement. Tyrion gave the man an annoyed look. We will double the wages of our city watch, he said, and encourage them to visit the brothels. We don't have the money, Pycelle began to say, but Tyrion didn't let him finish. If Baelish can find the money to let the late King Robert host his many tournaments, he can find the money to give our valiant city defenders better pay, Tyrion said, gazing at Baelish. Or can you no longer do magic, Lord Baelish? The well-groomed Valeman gave Tyrion a reassuring smile that the small man didn't buy for a second. I do believe I can find the money, my lord. Never worry, he promised. Might I say, it's a wonderful idea to encourage them to find some, relief. I'm so happy you think so, Tyrion said, because the taxes of each and every brothel in the city will go up by, let's say, 75%. Baelish barely kept up his mask, his only giveaway being a small twitch in the corner of his eye. Next to him, Varys was watching the conversation with an amused smile, leaning back in his chair and resting his arms on his rotund stomach. For what purpose, my lord? Baelish finally forced out, his mask still in place. Well, if we drive more people to go to the brothels, we can then take that money and give it back to the Iron Bank, Tyrion explained. Of course, unless you don't want to help bring down our debt, I would hate for a fourth member of this council to be gone. Baelish bowed slightly. I will see it done, my lord. At this point, Joffrey had lost interest in the discussion now that he wasn't the center of attention. He leaned against the chair in front of him, examining his immaculate fingernails for dirt. Joffrey, how about you go practice with your crossbow, Cersei suggested before turning to the other council members. That will be all for today, my lords. Joffrey looked confused but shrugged, striding out of the room, Sir Meryn Trant instantly flanking him. The others began to leave as well, filing out of the room till only Tyrion and Cersei were left. Baelish was one of the last to leave, giving Tyrion a small amused glance as he walked out. When they were alone, Cersei rounded on her brother, her eyes full of hate. I don't know how you managed to convince father. If I could convince father of anything, I would be Lord of Casterly Rock already. Tyrion interrupted with mock boredness, taking a drink of wine. I'm here to make sure you and your son don't burn down the city while father makes sure those who want to see the boy's head on a spike don't get the chance. Cersei continued to glare at Tyrion. Joffrey is king. Joffrey is king, Tyrion agreed before changing the subject. Now if you would be so kind, what happened with Ned Stark? Cersei shifted uneasily. He was spouting nonsense. Lies, she said, not meeting Tyrion's gaze. He had to be killed. Won the steps of the sept, Tyrion snapped. We have enemies lining up to take your son's head. Why must you make more? I tried to change his mind. Cersei snarled, defending herself. He would not hear it. Tyrion wagged his finger. You are his mother. You have more influence on him than anyone. I will do my best to make sure the city doesn't turn against us, but you must bring him to heel, and fast. Father is quite annoyed with you, and the fact that he has been captured as well didn't help that. What is he doing to rescue him? Cersei asked, her voice softening exponentially. Tyrion shrugged. I'm not sure. Perhaps we could trade for him. After all, we still have 2 Starks, he said, downing the last of his wine before pouring himself more. 1 Stark, Cersei said quietly. Tyrion stopped pouring, gently setting the pitcher down before gazing at his sister. 1? He asked. What happened to the other? It was the little bitch Arya, Cersei growled. I sent Sir Meryn and a group of guards to collect the girl and kill her dance teacher. They were all knocked out and the girl escaped. We haven't been able to find her or her teacher. Her dance teacher knocked out a Kingsguard and a group of guards, Tyrion asked, surprised. How is that possible? Cersei shook her head. I don't know. What kind of dance teacher did the girl have? Tyrion asked. Some sort of SOC, Cersei answered, in annoyance. Some kind of water dance. Tyrion froze. Water dance? He asked. The girl was learning to water dance. What of it? Cersei asked. It's dancing. Tyrion shook his head. Water dancing is a Braavosi form of sword fighting that is extremely hard to fight against if you've never seen it. If that man was a teacher, then Meryn Trant and the guards didn't have a chance. The man probably could have killed them with a bloody stick. He scolded his sister. So now we have what? 1 Stark? Cersei nodded. Sansa, she answered stubbornly. Tyrion sighed and drained his cup in one go. Well, there goes any chance of getting Jaime back, he said sadly. Stark will never trade him for one of his sisters. What do we do? Cersei asked quietly, looking at Tyrion. The imp shrugged, thinking for a moment. Continue to rule, he said finally. Our only hope is father now, him against more than half the realm. Jon VII. The cavalry host of Northmen and Rivermen rode west from Riverrun at dawn. The host was 10,000 strong, mostly composed of northern cavalry. Sarmark Piper had been left behind with the remainder of the Riverlands cavalry to clear the northern Riverlands of any Lannister deserters and raiders. It would make the trip south easier whenever the northern army decided to face Tywin Lannister. It was also an attempt to try and fool Tywin into thinking that the northern army was preparing to march south, but that was only a hope. No one truly believed that the old lion would be so easily fooled. Jon rode with Robb's battle guard, which now featured many new faces since the Battle of the Whispering Wood. Most notable among them was Lucas Blackwood, son of Lord Tydos, and Patrick Mallister, the heir to Seaguard. There were also no less than a dozen Freys as well. Jon rode next to Eddard Stark at the head of the group, though Jon felt like it was only so the temporary commander could get to know Jon better. It was one thing to be able to swing a sword, it was a whole other thing to be a man worth fighting beside. Robb spoke highly of you, you know, Eddard said casually as they rode. Before the Battle of the Whispering Wood, he said he wished that you had never gone to the wall. He wanted you by his side more than anyone else. Jon smiled slightly. I may not be a Stark, but Robb always treated me as his brother. I wish I could have been by his side at the battle. I'm content to have you by mine for this one. Eddard laughed. If anyone can beat that brute, he said, jerking his thumb at Brandon Hawker, then I'm convinced they can deal with anyone. Jon involuntarily shook his sword arm. Parrying the man's axe had left Jon nearly unable to raise his arm at all. It was like fighting a bear that wielded a bloody battle axe. Nearly beat, Jon replied. I got lucky on that one. Next time you won't. Brandon rumbled from behind Jon, causing the group to laugh at the big man's words. Their fun was interrupted by one of Sir Brendan's scouts, identified by his dark leathers, light chainmail, and short sword, rode up next to Jon. Sir Brendan requests your presence at the front of the column, he said. He wants you to bring your wolf as well. Jon nodded. Thank you, he said. Ghost, he called before spurring his horse forward, galloping past the others, the white wolf following. It took only moments for Jon to reach Sir Brendan's position at the front of the column. He was surrounded by the rest of the War Council, most of which didn't bother to acknowledge Jon. A few did, which was a small sign of acceptance that Jon was grateful to see. Sir Brendan, Jon said as he reined in his horse next to the aged knight. You requested my presence. The Blackfish nodded. We're approaching the spot where we'll spend the night. We have 3 more days till we reach the Golden Tooth. Your wolf there might be of some help. Jon nodded. Of course. From now on you'll ride with me at the front of the column. Your beast will pick up any enemies far quicker than my scouts might. Sir Brendan grunted. Jon nodded again. Ghost is a born and bred hunter. There's not many who'll be able to get by him. You best be right, lad. The great Jon rumbled. We're all depending on him. Line break. Jon looked out at where the Golden Tooth rose between the mountains. The Blackfish had referred to it as the gate to the west, and the metaphor made sense. The castle wasn't big or imposing, not compared to the likes of northern castles like Moat Cailin of Winterfell. Much like Riverrun, it was the geographical location that made the castle so important. It sat almost exactly on the Gold Road, meaning that if the northern host wanted to enter the Westerlands, they had to get past the Tooth. Lord Tywin wasn't a fool. The Golden Tooth would be well stocked and manned to prevent any host from entering his lands. Jon leaned against a tree, crossing his arms. According to Eddard Stark, who was representing the king on the council, the Blackfish's scouts could not find any way past the Golden Tooth, which meant that the rest of the army would have to be brought forward to besiege the castle. The problem with that was that there was an army of unknown size sitting behind the Tooth that could easily reinforce the castle. It could take months to take the castle even with the North's and Riverland's advantage in number. Ghost was laying at Jon's feet, tired after a day of riding. He was getting very big now, easily the size of a mastiff, if not bigger. Sam and Jon had talked idly about how big the direwolf might grow. Maester Luwin had read up on stories of direwolves, and apparently they could grow to be larger than ponies. Jon would love to see how the enemy reacted when they saw a snarling wolf the size of a small horse charging them. Ghost's head snapped up suddenly, his nose sniffing the wind as he looked towards the castle. Jon noticed the movement. Ghost? The wolf got to its feet and began to trot towards the castle, catching his master off guard. Jon jogged to catch up with him, his eyes glancing around as they got further from the camp. He followed the wolf for more than a mile, all the while keeping an eye on the castle. He knew that the Blackfish had scouts surrounding the army, but who knows what they would think if they saw Jon sneaking through the forest. That's if any Lannister scouts didn't catch him first. Finally they reached the edge of the tree line where the road began to ascend towards the castle. Ghost stopped a little ways back from the edge. Sitting down, Jon took a knee next to his silent companion, rubbing his head as he looked at what had drawn Ghost. A little ways away, a small pack of goats grazed quietly on the barren grassland in the shadow of the castle. Jon frowned. You got hungry? He asked, in annoyance, glancing at his friend. Ghost whined and shuffled forward, still sniffing the wind. Jon sighed and looked back at the goats, who had started heading towards the hills. Jon narrowed his eyes. The goats were ambling along a small track, barely noticeable among the low shrubs and rocks. Jon couldn't follow the track in its entirety, but from the looks of it, most of the track would be shrouded in shadow, thanks to the castle. Jon grinned. "Ghost, you're brilliant," he said happily, standing up. "Come on." Jon made his way back to the camp, walking with a purpose in his step. When he entered the camp, he walked straight to the command tent before being stopped by one of the guards outside. "Hold there, lad. The Blackfish is in a meeting," he said firmly. Jon nodded. "I have news that the Blackfish needs to hear." The men glanced at each other before one shrugged and entered the tent. After a few moments, the flap opened for Jon. Inside, the Blackfish and the other commanders were huddled around a table that had a map of the Westerlands and the Riverlands. Ser Brynden straightened. "Jon, you said you had something." Jon nodded. "Ghost has found a way past the Golden Tooth." "How?" Rose Bolton asked quietly. "Ghost caught the scent of a couple of goats near the edge of the tree line. I noticed that the animals were taking a small goat path through the mountains and past the castle," Jon explained. Ser Brynden raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure of this?" Jon nodded. "Send a couple of scouts and look towards the bottom right of the castle. It'll be there." Ser Brynden thought for a moment before shaking his head. "No need. I'll take your word for it. You can find it again?" "I can," Jon answered confidently. Ser Brynden looked at the others, who were looking for him to give the order. The Blackfish grunted, rolling up the map. "Have the men prepared to ride by midnight," he ordered. "We're lucky. It's a new moon tonight." The other commanders nodded and filed out, some giving Jon approving looks. One of the last men to leave was Great Jon Umber, who stopped to look over Jon. The younger man resisted the urge to take a step back. "If this works, you and I will share an ale, and you can tell me where a mad bastard can get one of those beasts," he said with a deep chuckle, glancing down at Ghost. Jon smiled slightly. "You can have both the ales, my lord. I just want to do my part to help my brother win this war," he said. "And if you want a direwolf, I have a decent guess where you might find some, though there's a little wall in your way." The Great Jon smiled fiercely, patting Jon on the shoulder heartily. "Spoken like a true man of the North," he said with a laugh. "My name is Snow," Jon joked, earning another laugh from the big lord, as well as another round of back-patting before he left, leaving Jon and the Blackfish alone. "You did well, Jon. You and the wolf," the Blackfish said, putting his maps in their sheaths. "If this path is truly where you say it is, then you both might have just saved thousands of men." "It was Ghost who found the path, sir," Jon said. "I just followed." "Still," Ser Brynden pressed, "you brought us valuable information not even my most experienced scouts would be able to get." "It was luck," Jon said. Ser Brynden grunted. "You'd be surprised with how closely related luck and success are when it comes to war. Fortune favors the bold." "Daron us," Jon said immediately. Ser Brynden nodded. "Indeed, the young dragon coined the phrase during his conquest of Dorne. You know it? Daeron I Targaryen became king at a young age, and because of his ambition, vowed to finish the conquest his ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror, failed to do, conquer Dorne, within a year. That's exactly what he did, as a young man not yet 18 name days. Unfortunately, Dorne lived up to the Martell words, unbent, unbowed, unbroken. The Dornish retook their homeland in a few months, betraying and killing the boy king under the guise of wanting to bring peace to both sides. True peace would come later, when Daeron's younger brother Baelor, later known as Baelor the Blessed, married his nephew to the Dornish princess, effectively ending the war that the young dragon had started. Jon shrugged. "Daeron's one of Robb's heroes," he explained. "That's all he talked about for a fortnight, when we were boys. The young wolf fashions himself after the young dragon." Ser Brynden grunted. "It's ironic that one of our king's heroes belongs to a family that his father fought to bring down." Jon shifted slightly. "Not all Targaryens were bad," he said awkwardly. "A few rotten apples spoiled the bunch in the end." Ser Brynden raised an eyebrow and looked at Jon, but for shrugging and nodding. "Aye, fair point. We all thought Rhaegar would be one of the great ones." Jon froze. "I'm sorry?" Ser Brynden made a vague gesture. The tournament at Harrenhal was supposed to be a secret meeting for some of the heads of the great families to meet with the Bard Prince, to discuss ways to safely remove the Mad King from the throne and put his son on the damn thing. Of course, the unexpected arrival of the Mad Bastard destroyed that meeting before it ever had a chance to begin. Brynden sighed. Perhaps for the best. None knew what Rhaegar was truly capable of. Running off with Lyanna Stark, I mean. Jon nodded slowly. Forgive me, Sir Brendan, but how do you know all this? Sir Brendan chuckled. My brother Hoster was supposed to be a part of that meeting. I overheard him and the Queen of Thorns speaking about it one day at Harrenhal during the tournament. Did you believe that Rhaegar would have been a good king? Jon asked curiously. Sir Brendan stopped what he was doing and thought for a moment. Looking back at Jon, the realm was holding its breath, lad. We all saw what Aerys was, and when Tywin stepped down his hand to the king, we all knew it was a matter of time. Rhaegar was supposed to be a breath of fresh air, a savior if you will. He seemed to have the makings of a great Targaryen ruler. He was as skilled with a blade and lance as he was with a harp. He was respectful, honest, humble, and charming. There was no poison in the man, at least none that we could see, but we were wrong, and the realm paid the price for the man's actions. Jon was quiet as the knight spoke about the Bard Prince. Jon didn't think much about who his actual father really was, more of what he did to his mother. It was strange to hear that Rhaegar was a good man, or at least known as one. It gave Jon a little relief to know that the man wasn't fully bad. Finally, when the silence seemed too awkward for either of them to deal with, Jon broke it. With you leave, Sir Brendan, I should go get ready for the ride tonight, he said. Sir Brendan snapped out of thoughts. Of course, he said, making sure to get some sleep. It'll be a long night. The Iron Islands were exactly how Theon remembered them. A cloudy, wind-swept land with stout keeps surrounded by clusters of fishing villages, where the long ships of the Iron Fleet laid at anchor. The land wasn't very fertile, a bit of thin, rocky soil, where the people stubbornly tried to grow crops, but the Ironborn wasn't dependent on the land. They made their living on the seas, raiding villages and towns, claiming salt wives and valuables through the iron price. Theon grinned as he walked through the town of Lordsport, taking in the salt air and the feeling of the wind on his face. He may have grown up in Winterfell, but he knew when he was home. Pike was his home, and these were his people. The drowned god is calling upon us once more to take up our axe and spear, to take to our waves once more and take what is ours, through iron and blood. A man preached as Theon reached the outside of the city. Several people were gathered around a tall, thin man who was standing in an estuary. The man wore a rough, mottled cloak of dull blue, green, and gray. He wore his hair and beard long, the ends of both almost reaching his waist. Intertwined among the hair was seaweed. A water skin hung at his side. Theon stood at the back of the group and watched the man preach. He never smiled, his face remaining grim and purposeful. He spoke with passion, however, about his love for the drowned god, and how the Ironborn need to take back their way of life. The Stag King is dead. We must take what is ours with the iron price, he declared. And what would you take? Theon questioned arrogantly, pushing himself to the front of the crowd. When he was facing the man, he spread his feet slightly and hung his hands on his belt, holding his head high. The man stopped his preaching, looking at Theon. Something flickered in his eyes. The boy has returned, he said gruffly, though he is not the boy I remember. Theon frowned. Do you know who I am, old man? He asked, before turning to the crowd. I am Theon Greyjoy, last remaining son of Balon Greyjoy. I have returned home to usher in a new era for my people, an era in which we shall own the coasts of Westeros. The crowd muttered amongst themselves, glancing at Theon. They had a hard time believing the young man in front of them. He was dressed in ornate steel plate armor and a fine cloak, neither of which were stained with salt. Even the sword at his side didn't look like it had been used more than once or twice. He didn't look like an Ironborn, but a mainlander. It has been a long time, nephew, the man grunted. You have been away for too long. Theon frowned, turning back to the man. Uncle, he asked curiously. He remembered that he had an uncle who died during the Greyjoy Rebellion and another that was exiled. Uncle Aeron. The man nodded. I am known as the Damphair now, he said. I serve the drowned god. The Theon got down on a knee. I have been away for a long time, uncle. I would ask that you bestow a blessing of the drowned god upon me. Aeron gazed at the young man in front of him before grabbing the water skin at his side, raising it towards the sky. Drowned god, your servant has been away for too long. He has lost his way. With your blessing, I wash him with seawater to bring him back into our way of life, he said before turning the skin over, pouring seawater over Theon, who kept his head bowed while the water washed over him. When the water skin was empty, the Damphair returned it to his side. Stand, he demanded. You still have much to prove, nephew, but you now fight with the drowned god by your side. What is dead may never die, but rises again harder and stronger, Theon finished firmly. Thank you, uncle. The Damfair brushed aside Theon's thanks. I assume you did not come back just to receive a blessing. Go now. Theon nodded and strode off towards the castle, which loomed in the distance. It had been many years since he had set eyes on the home of his birth, but it was still an impressive sight to behold. 3 keeps, each set on a tower of rock that jutted out of the sea. That's what made the seat of House Greyjoy so hard to attack. If one keep were to be attacked, the defenders could fall back to the other 2 keeps. Of course, because of the location of the keeps, an attacker could simply take the main keep and allow the other 2 towers to fall to hunger and fatigue. But the Ironborn were fierce fighters who would sell their lives dearly before they would ever retreat. When Theon entered the castle, he expected someone to notice and remember him, but no one did. Everyone he came across gave him a cold shoulder or a glare that was like a hammer blow to the young man's confidence. The castle staff and guards all looked depressed. Theon was expecting to be welcomed home with smiles and greetings, thinking that his father would be there for him, but no one was. It wasn't at all what Theon was expecting. The young man still remembered the way to his father's solar, which was located in the sea tower, the oldest of the 3 keeps that made up Pike. The bridge that Theon had to cross to get to the tower was made of rope and wood, swinging and swaying as the winds and waves battered it. The Theon did his best to keep his eyes on the door on the other end of the perilous bridge, walking with confidence that was expected of him. He had nothing to fear of the sea, and he would be damned if he allowed it to get to him now. When Theon made it to the other side of the bridge, it didn't take long for him to find his father's solar, which was protected by guards wearing black iron breastplates and pothelms. Hold it, boy, one snapped. What do you want? He asked, putting a hand on Theon's shoulder. Theon shrugged the man's hand off, one hand dropping to his sword. I am Theon Greyjoy, heir to Pike, and I have come to talk with my father, he growled, walking past the man and throwing the door to the solar open. His father's solar could only be described by one word: gloom. A brazier sat on one end of the room, but it did little to fight against the darkness that seemed to be lurking in from all around. The fire's only use was providing a modest amount of warmth, but nothing else. The rest of the room was filled with items from past raids that his father had led. Even the furniture had been taken. Lord Balon Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike and Lord of the Iron Islands, stood with 2 armored individuals looking over a map. When Theon entered, all 3 looked up. Theon stood a small distance from his father, standing tall with his head held high and a hand resting on his sword. Father, he said proudly, I have returned. The Lord Reaper of Pike was a thin man with hard black eyes and long gray hair. He had a slight stoop in his shoulder, but that did little to take away from his intimidating glare. His skin was the color and texture of leather from years on the sea exposed to the elements. Looking at his son, whom he hadn't seen in over a decade, the man didn't show even an ounce of happiness or surprise. What in the blazes are you wearing? He barked, catching his son off guard with the question. Theon's smirk vanished in an instant. He looked down at himself before looking at his father. I'm wearing my armor, he answered uncertainly. Balon's frown deepened. Did you take it with the iron price, or did you have some blacksmith make you that pretty armor? He asked, snapping out the question. Theon frowned. The blacksmith at Winterfell made it, he said before being interrupted. Of course some mainlander smith made it. Look at the engraving on the bloody thing. I'm surprised he didn't make it for some southern lady. One of the people in armor joked, leaning against the desk. Theon looked at the person who spoke, surprised that it was a girl. She had short black hair with a sly smirk and a beak-like nose that seemed a tad too large for her face. She was lean and long-legged, but had an aura of self-assurance around her. She wore a jerkin of overlapping steel plates, and had 2 axes hanging from a studded belt. Who are you? He challenged, his father's comments still ringing in his ears. The girl looked at Theon with mock sadness. Come now, brother, don't tell me you've forgotten about your sister. Theon's shock was evident. Asha? He asked. It had been years since he had seen his sister, but nothing could have expected him for the person that stood before him. She looked like an Ironborn. She looked like a son. The girl nodded. Hello, little brother, she said sarcastically. How wonderful for you to finally join us. What are you doing here, boy? Balon snapped, breaking Theon from the shock of seeing his sister. Theon looked at his father. I have come with a message from King Robb Stark, he said, trying to recover from all that had happened so far. Balon raised an eyebrow. Has my final son become a mere messenger for the family that took him from his own? The Theon went red in the face. I asked Robb to come here to appeal to you. He wants to ally with the Iron Islands. Ally? Asha asked. What for? Robb is asking for help assaulting the Westerlands, Theon explained. His only request is that the Iron Fleet attacks the coastline of the Westerlands, and in return we can become kings of the Iron Islands again. Balon's eyes lit up with anger. You think I need some northern pup to tell me that I can put on a damn crown? I am the Lord Reaper of Pike. I take what I want, and I take it with the iron price. Theon took a step forward. Father, I urge you to accept Robb's request. We can show Westeros the true might of the Iron Fleet once again. The coast of the Westerlands is weak and ripe for the taking. We will show the mainlanders that we are strong, but I refuse to come at the behest of some boy king who as green as fucking grass. We are not dogs who come when called, Balon growled, turning back towards the map. I have already decided on the target for my raiders. The Theon frowned. Where? The north, the last person said. Theon remembered his uncle Victarion on sight. He was a large man with a broad chest and flat stomach. He wore thick steel plate over chainmail, with a heavy cloak of black and gold hanging over his shoulders. On the table behind him sat a steel helm that was decorated with a kraken, its steel tentacles wrapping around the headpiece. Leaning against the helm was a double-bladed battle axe that made Brandon Hawkers look small. The Theon frowned. The north? To what end? Revenge, Balon answered firmly. Eddard Stark thought he could take my son away from me, without retribution. It has been many years, but I will finally get revenge on the man by ravaging his land and people. Theon was unable to process what he was hearing. Eddard Stark is dead, he said. Why take it out on his people? They have done nothing to you. Balon rounded on his son, striking him across the face. The force of the blows sent Theon staggering. Your years with the wolves have made you soft, boy, he said, his voice deathly quiet. Our way of life demands retribution. First it will come to the north, and then it will spread to all of Westeros. None shall stand before us. Not the Hawkers, not the Red Wines, not Stannis Bloody Baratheon. We will take what is ours with the iron price, and kill all who stand before us. What is dead may never die, but rises again harder and stronger. Victarion and Asha finished firmly. Theon looked at his family, holding his cheek. This is not at all what he expected to come home to. No one, not even his sibling, looked happy to see him again. He had expected a hero's welcome, and instead, he was being treated like an outcast and a stranger. Balon walked up to his son, looking him in the eye. We will assemble the Iron Fleet to its full strength before we attack the north. I will give you one chance, and one chance only. Join us. Take a ship in Reavers. Prove to me you're Ironborn. Or go back to your boy king and be stripped of the name Greyjoy. What is your choice? Theon glanced towards his sister and uncle, both of which were gazing at him with different expressions. Victarion simply gazed at him, his eyes emotionless, like Theon meant nothing to him. Asha was different. She looked at him with some degree of intrigue, and even a slight bit of sympathy. Theon looked back at his father, swallowing. I am Ironborn. Balon stepped back, walking over to his desk. That remains to be seen, he said, but you will have ample chances to prove yourself, just as your sister has. Westeros is at a breaking point. The wolves and lions are at each other's throats. While the realm burns, we shall strike, just like the days of Heir the Black and the Grey King. We will take what we want, and the seas shall turn red with the blood of our enemies. Theon watched as Balon reached across the table, picking up a rough crown made from driftwood. This time there will be no damn Stag King to keep me from my rightful place on the Seastone chair. Jon the Faith. The rain started just after nightfall, swiftly turning into a downpour that soaked the men to the bone. Jon sat easily on his charger, Ghost pacing right in front of him. He, the other commanders, and the battle guard were at the front lines of the cavalry. The only ones missing were Lords Mallister and Hawker. Each man held a flank and would sweep in from the north and south and wrap around the enemy camp before pushing in. The Lannister camp looked sleepy and peaceful to Jon, a mass of tents and small fires. There was hardly any movement between tents as the men huddled in their tents, wisely staying out of the rain. The only people who were outside were the weary sentries who stood at intervals on the outskirts of the camps, alone and miserable in the elements. None of them noticed the arrival of thousands of horsemen not even 100 yards from the camp. This would be Jon's first battle, and he tried not to show how afraid he was, but he couldn't help the fluttering of his fingers as they tapped the pommel of frost. He was anxious to begin the attack, but he knew that he had to remain calm and wait for the Blackfish to give the order. It was Ghost's howl that signaled the attack, spooking the Lannister horses into a stampede that trampled half of the camp. When the Lannister soldiers came running out of their tents to find out what had happened, that's when the northern host struck. It wasn't a fair fight. The northern cavalry cut down the Lannister soldiers without remorse, tearing through the defenders like a hot knife through butter. The enemy tried to fight back using spears, swords, even stools, whatever they could get their hands on to defend themselves, but it was no use. They were being massacred. When Jon had been a boy, he had imagined battle being a scene of carefully orchestrated movements, almost like a dance. He found out that night that battle was nothing like a dance. It was a gruesome, mind-numbing, repetitive affair, where Jon found himself just hacking away at whoever was in front of him. Having a Valyrian steel sword helped the matter since it cut through virtually everything in its path. Jon had been with the Blackfish when they had made it to the center of the camp where the command tent was, stopping while the rest of the cavalry surged around the structure like a wave breaking against a massive rock. Stafford Lannister hadn't even had time to properly armor himself, as the Tully Knight found the man with only a breastplate on over his nightshirt, barefoot with a sword in his hand. From the state of his hair, the Northern Army had given him a rude awakening. Ser Brynden pointed his sword at the Lannister, the blade stained red with gore. "Stafford Lannister, your men have been routed. Surrender," he ordered. If looks could kill, then Ser Brynden would have dropped dead from the glare Stafford Lannister gave him, but the Lannister knight knew that he had been defeated, and there was no use fighting back only to lose his life. "I yield," he said angrily, throwing down his sword. Ser Brynden nodded to the man. "Have him bound. I want quarter given to any enemy that surrenders. Those who refuse are to be struck down," he ordered the others. 2 men jumped off their horses and moved towards the unarmed knight, while the others rode off to pursue the enemy. The Battle of Oxcross had lasted only a couple of hours, but it would soon be known as another stunning victory for the Northern King, even though he had not been present at the actual battle. Now all Tywin had left was his host of 20,000 at Harrenhal, and whatever men his stunted son could put together at Duskendale. Line break. More than 50 nobles have been captured, along with 1,000 or so soldiers. Lord Roose Bolton reported, "We lost 1 man for every 5 of theirs. The captains could be of some use, but the others are nothing more than mouths to feed." The Leech Lord and the Blackfish had been walking through the battlefield, watching the Silent Sisters and healers go about their business of giving last rites, saving those they could, and helping ease the pain of those they couldn't. The dead were being stripped of cloaks, swords and boots, all items that could later come in handy. The camp was also being scoured for food, cloth, metal, and wood. Brynden was an experienced campaigner and knew the importance of resources, and loathed to let such a source go to waste. Ser Brynden glanced at the Northern Lord, frowning. "Speak plainly, Lord Bolton." "My house has a saying, Ser Brynden. A naked man has few secrets. A flayed man has none," Bolton replied casually. Ser Brynden stopped, turning to look at the man. "We won't torture them," he said firmly. "Besides, isn't the practice banned in the north?" "We're not in the north," Rose commented. "We won't win this war by being honorable." "We're not going to torture them," Ser Brynden again, his tone leaving no room for argument. "King Robb left me in charge of this host, and that is my order." Lord Bolton nodded and walked off. The Blackfish watched him go, not liking that the man's mind had gone to torture. He remembered the man from the last 2 wars, and he still seemed like the same person to Brynden. He was cunning and was an above-average warrior and commander, but there was something inherently untrustworthy about the man. Perhaps it was the sinister history of his house, or simply how the man looked and spoke. Regardless, he would have to be watched. "Ser Brynden," Jon said, walking up to the old knight. "Is everything all right?" Ser Brynden glanced at the direction where the Leech Lord had walked off, before turning to the young warrior. "Fine," he answered. "Have you done as I asked?" Jon nodded. "We lost around 300 men, with another few hundred injured in some way. Those who are too wounded to keep going are being loaded on carts to return to Riverrun. And the enemy? Still counting bodies, but so far it seems like only a few hundred made it out of the fight," Jon said. "Have we learned anything from the survivors?" This host was approximately 15,000 strong, but Stafford had stripped many of the surrounding garrisons to put it together. One Forley Prester was also at the Battle of the Camps. Jon explained. He must have been commanding the portion of the Kingslayer's army that managed to retreat. Sir Brendan muttered. Jon nodded. Aye, so it seems. Other than that, the army was made up of boys and old men, some sellswords, but the true cutting edge of the army were those men under Prester. How did you get the men to talk? Sir Brendan asked curiously. Eddard and I found a pitcher of arbor gold in Sir Stafford's tent, Jon said. I figured none of the men had ever tasted it before and used that in some food as bribes. Good work, Jon. Sir Brendan praised. Any word from the groups I sent out? Lord Umber cut down several deserters heading towards Casterly Rock, and Lord Blackwood didn't find anyone on the road towards the Golden Tooth. Jon reported, safe to say that our way back into the Riverlands is safe. Sir Brendan rubbed his jaw, looking around. An idea was beginning to form in his head. He had been debating what to do now that the Lannister host had been scattered. The Golden Tooth needed to be taken, or else things could become difficult if the cavalry was trapped in the Westerlands and Tywin decided to strike north and attack the rest of the army at Riverrun. Conventional military tactics told him to gather the rest of the army at Riverrun and march west, but taking the castle would be a major loss of life. The plan he had in his head was bold and some might even call it foolish. But if it could be pulled off, then thousands of men would be saved in the long run. I want bodies stripped of armor, he ordered. Enough for 2,000 men. I want them all Riverlanders and assembled as soon as possible. Jon raised an eyebrow. To what purpose? I mean to dress men in Lannister armor and send them towards the Golden Tooth. Sir Brendan explained. Then they will be able to take the castle from the inside. Jon frowned. But who would be able to lead such a force? Men like Blackwood and Bracken will be recognized. Sir Brendan smiled mischievously. Lord Blackwood perhaps, but not his second son Lucas. I doubt many would be able to know the lad simply by his face, certainly not if he's dressed like a Lannister captain. Jon nodded, understanding what the man had in mind. I'll get the men together, he promised before striding off. Line break. Jon, Sir Brendan, and Lucas Blackwood used Stafford Lannister's tent for their meeting. The Blackfish had already doled out responsibilities to others on the War Council. Rose Bolton was tasked with taking Ashmark and the Crag. Lords Karstark and Glover would raid down the coast from Banefort to Case. The Great Jon was heading south to capture gold mines, and Lady Mormont was told to push as much livestock as she could towards the Riverlands. Sir Brendan and the rest of the Riverlords would remain here for a day or two before marching back to Riverrun. That would give Lucas and his men time to complete the Blackfish's plan. You understand the plan? Sir Brendan asked again, crossing his arms. The young noble nodded as he finished adjusting his stolen armor. Lucas wore a red and gold cuirass with similarly colored shoulder guards. He also now wore a red cloak. The ridiculous helmet that Lannister soldiers wore was on a nearby table. Get into the castle. Tell them about the battle. Say we're survivors. That night, take off the armor and take the castle. Lucas repeated, summarizing the Blackfish's plan. I also have to remember not to take my helmet off. The Blackfish had made it perfectly clear to Blackwood and those he was leading that honor had to be set aside for the plan to work. They could not afford to set off alarms because men wanted to kill enemies with honor. Sir Brendan had helped push the message by saying that if the mission succeeded, then the supplies captured by the Northern Lords would go to helping rebuild the Riverlands. Sir Brendan nodded. We don't know who might recognize you, so be vigilant. Why aren't Northerners allowed in Lucas's host? Jon asked curiously. Your accent is too different. It's thicker and can easily give you away. A Riverlands accent will stick out less. Sir Brendan explained. That said, you need to watch how you speak, he said, turning back to Blackwood. Lucas raised an eyebrow. What's wrong with how I speak? You just said my accent won't be noticeable. Sir Brendan shook his head. It's not about how you sound, but the way you talk. You talk like you've spent your life in a bloody castle. You need to sound like a lowborn. Lucas frowned. How do I do that? Instead of saying my lord, say blord. Sir Brendan said. Talk with some of your men and copy the way they say things. Lucas still looked a little confused but nodded nonetheless. Sir Brendan knew a lot about war. If he said Lucas needed to do something, then he should probably do it. I'll work on it, he promised. Sir Brendan nodded. See that you do. I'll give you 2 days head start to get into the castle and take it. Lucas bowed slightly and left, grabbing the helmet on the way out. When he was gone, Jon turned to the Blackfish. I would like to go with Lucas. Sir Brynden shook his head. Your accent will give you away, he replied, turning to look at the map of the Westerlands. And if that doesn't, that massive wolf of yours will. Jon shifted. I can leave Ghost with you, he said. He'll stay if I tell him. Besides, if your plan goes as it should, I only have to make it a day without talking. The Blackfish sighed and turned to look at the young warrior. Why do you want to go? I want to play a part in this war, Jon said quietly. I wasn't with Robb at the Whispering Wood or Riverrun, and Oxcross was barely a battle. With this I play an important part. Sir Brynden gazed steadily at Jon, who met the knight's gaze without wavering. Fine, find Blackwood and tell him that you're his second. Sir Brynden relented, holding up a hand to stop Jon before he left. However, if you are imprisoned or caught, he and others are not responsible for you. I will not have the mission jeopardized. Jon nodded firmly. I understand. One day you'll realize that war isn't about fighting, lad, but I see your point. Sir Brynden grunted. Now go. Collect armor and be ready to ride in the morning. Jon bowed slightly. Thank you, Sir Brynden. Don't thank me yet, lad. There's still a lot of fighting that has to be done, he said quietly, listening as Jon left the tent. Robb the Seventh. The sheer size of the camp amazed Robb, who had never seen such a sizable force assembled in one area. It was like a sea of colorful tents and banners, with the chatter of men and other camp sounds were like thunder in Robb's ears. For the young king who controlled a large force of his own, the might of the Reach and Stormlands was truly a military marvel. Robb and his small group of companions picked their way through the camp, having been informed by a sentry that King Renly was currently hosting a tournament to find the final member of what the man called the Rainbow Guard. Daisy Mormont scowled. It's like the man doesn't realize we're at war. Well, if you moved 2 miles in 2 weeks and had tournaments and feasts every day, you'd forget about war too. Small Jon grumbled. The two northerners had every right to be annoyed. For them, the war was personal, and Renly seemed to be treating it like a big game. Robb was no fool. He knew that Renly had no right to claim the throne. When he crowned himself king, it was nothing but a power grab by the younger Baratheon. But the man had the means and opportunity to take the throne, and Robb meant to take advantage of that by allying himself to Renly as a fellow monarch. They're not prepared for war, Darren Hornwood added. Some of these men look like they've never picked up a spear before in their lives. Robb shrugged. When you have 100,000 men, you can afford to have a few thousand men untrained, he said. Besides, this is not our problem. If Renly wishes to face his brother or Tywin with poorly trained men, then let him be at fault. As the 4 riders approached the crowd, a group of young stable hands ran out to offer their services. Robb, looking down at the hopeful boy who was waiting patiently, dismounted and handed the reins to the boy, giving him a brief smile. The others followed his lead, sliding off their horses and onto the muddy ground. Robb moved closer to the sound of metal clashing, removing his gloves and tucking them into his belt. The fight was between 2 warriors who looked like polar opposites. One was tall and powerfully built, wearing bronze-colored steel plate armor and wielding a shield and a morning star. His shield had a sun and a moon on a checkerboard pattern of maroon and blue. Robb did not recognize the sigil, but he guessed it was from a Stormlander house. The second man was smaller than the first, lean and muscular, wearing ornate silver armor that had metal flowers all over. His shield was green with 3 golden roses on a vine. Robb recognized the sigil instantly. It was the sigil of House Tyrell, overlords of the Reach. Robb guessed that the fighter might be from a secondary branch of the main family, hence the 3 flowers. Despite the size difference between the 2 fighters, the smaller man seemed to be handling himself well. His footwork and skill with a blade were undeniable. Each strike was fast and perfectly timed, never leaving him out of position. Loras, Highgarden, a girl cried out from Robb's left, but he couldn't see who it was. The silver swordsman managed to disarm the bronze fighter by striking his gauntlet and making him drop the heavy weapon. That did little to deter the big warrior, who simply dropped their shield and tackled the silver knight, bringing them both down into the mud. The bronze fighter, for how big they were, moved with deceptive agility. Quickly climbing on top of the silver-clad swordsman, they drew their dagger and opened their opponent's visor, putting the tip just under the man's nose. I yield, the silver warrior said bitterly, loud enough for all to hear. The bronze warrior grunted and pushed himself up off the ground, stretching a hand out to help the silver swordsman, who Robb guessed was named Loras, off the ground. Loras ignored the hand and scrambled awkwardly to his feet, ripping off his helmet. The man was almost unnaturally handsome, even when covered in sweat and dirt. He had a mass of brown curls and large, golden brown eyes. He had laugh lines around his eyes and mouth, but he wasn't laughing at the moment. Someone was slowly clapping off to Robb's right. He had curly, jet-black hair and electric blue eyes. His face was narrow and soft, much different from the hard, battle-weary faces Robb was used to seeing. He wore golden half-plate steel armor over a blue gambeson, with a blue cape draped over his shoulders and back. At his side was an exquisite sword, with a gold crossguard shaped like antlers and fresh black leather hilt. It looked as if it had never been held before. The most important thing about the man was what was on his head. Standing out amongst his curls was a golden crown of interwoven antlers, looking as if it was meant to be on the man's head. Robb knew that he was looking at Renly Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End and self-proclaimed King of the Reach and Stormlands. Renly was beaming at the bronze warrior. "You are everything your father promised and more," he said, chuckling. "I have seen Sir Loras bested a few times, but never quite in that fashion." The woman, who Robb still couldn't see, defended the Silver Knight. "Come now, your grace, my brother fought valiantly for you." Renly nodded in agreement. "That he did, my love," he said, smiling down at someone. He then turned back to the bronze warrior. "Step forward and ask a boon. I swear that I will do my best to have it done," he declared. The bronze warrior took a few steps towards Renly, and removed his helm. The crowd let out a collective gasp. The bronze warrior was a woman. Not an attractive woman, but a woman nonetheless. She had a plain face, with startling blue eyes and short hay-colored hair. Her nose was a little crooked as well as if it had been broken and badly reset. The only good thing that could be said about her was that she looked born to wear her armor. Robb could almost feel the smirk on Daisy's face. She knelt before Renly, bowing her head. "I wish to be one of your 7, your grace," she announced, her voice strong and feminine. "To be one of your sworn swords and protect you from those who would do you harm." The crowd began to mutter, interested to see what their king would say, ignoring the chatter and the displeased look Loras was giving him. Renly smiled warmly and clapped his hands. "It shall be done. Rise, Brienne the Blue," he declared happily. Brienne nodded once and took her place just in front of the raised dais that Renly sat on. A steward quickly stepped up from beside the platform that Renly was sitting at and blew a horn, silencing the watchers. "I present Robb Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and King in the North," the man announced, adding the last part reluctantly. The crowd was silent as Robb and his companions came forward, standing on the same muddy ground that Brienne and Loras had just fought on. Some whispering and pointing as they saw Greywind. The dire wolf was the size of a large dog. Larger, in fact. The crowd had every right to be afraid of him. Robb and each of his companions were dressed for war in leather and steel, their weapons hanging by their sides under their cloaks. They looked like the fearsome northerners that they were. Brienne, who had been joined by Loras, stepped towards him. "It's customary to kneel before the king." Robb glanced idly at her before giving Renly a polite nod. Renly just grinned at him, not seeming to care that Robb had not bowed. "It's quite all right, Brienne. Lord Robb is a special guest. Any son of Eddard Stark is," he said happily, before his face grew dark. "I heard about your father's death at the hands of Joffrey. I will see his death avenged. I swear it." The crowd cheered at his words, but Robb wasn't impressed. He preferred actions over flowery words. However, he knew that he had to be polite to the Southern King. Robb needed his men if he was going to defeat Tywin Lannister. Robb bowed his head once again. "Thank you for your words, my lord," he said, choosing his words carefully. The Blackfish had tried to explain to Robb that speaking in the South was very different than it was in the North, especially in the Reach. However, Robb had disregarded his great-uncle's words, stating that he was a Northman, and at war. There was no time for false kindness. Once again, Brienne wasn't happy with the way Renly was addressed, but Robb didn't care. Renly grinned again, gesturing to the woman sitting at his side. "May I introduce my queen, Lady Margaery Tyrell of Highgarden," he said, introducing the woman who sat on his side who had cheered on Loras during the fight. Robb looked over, and his heart stopped for a moment. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had thick, soft, curly brown hair that was neatly done up in a southern hairstyle. Her eyes, large and brown, were full of humor and kindness. Her skin was pale and unblemished. Her slender, womanly figure was shown off in full in her southern dress. She had a small, shy smile on her face, but her eyes were alive with life. She nodded respectfully to Robb. "You have our condolences, my lord. My father always spoke highly of Lord Stark." Robb nodded back. "Thank you, my lady," he said, his voice a bit more gentle. "My companions, Darren Hornwood, Small John Umber, and Daisy Mormont," he said, introducing his friends. Renly glanced towards Greywind. "I see you Starks are very close with the beasts on your banner," he joked, getting his men to laugh as well. Robb nodded. "We are," he said seriously. "May we talk in private?" Renly nodded and descended from the platform, gesturing towards the row of tents. "Of course," he said with a smirk. "This way." The two of them, flanked by Brienne and Loras, and followed by Robb's companions, walked leisurely through the camp, with Renly being cheered and greeted as he walked. He returned their cheers with waves and smiles. "You are well loved by your men," Robb commented. Renly nodded. "Yes, I like to think I am." His smile became a bit more mischievous. "Certainly more so than my brother Stannis. A dreadfully dull man, my brother. If he didn't look like a Baratheon, then I would have thought he was carved from the wall you and your friends are so fond of." Robb raised an eyebrow, surprised with how easily Renly just insulted his brother. "Never met him," Robb grunted. Renly laughed. "And hopefully you don't anytime soon. The man can turn the mood of an entire tavern by simply walking through the door." Robb didn't laugh at Renly's joke. In the north, family was everything. Sure, Theon, Jon and he joked with each other, but it was nothing more than a little fun between friends. Jon and Theon would sometimes take it too far, as their differing personalities would clash, but it never went as far as to speak badly behind each other's back. With Renly, it seemed like he genuinely did not care for his older brother. When they reached Renly's tent, Robb stopped outside it, looking at the banner. "I was under the impression that the Baratheon banner was black and gold," he asked curiously. The banner outside the tent had the same prancing stag, but it was yellow instead of black. "On a field of green, not gold," Renly nodded. "Yes, my brother Robert claimed the Iron Throne bearing the traditional sigil. I am planning on doing the same, but with my own flair," he explained happily, before walking into the tent. Robb turned back to his companions. "Wait here," he instructed. "Hopefully this shouldn't take long." Robb entered the tent, where he was surprised to find Loras lounging on a chair, eating an apple. The tent itself was impressive, large and spacious, with a large map of Westeros hung on the wall and a seemingly endless supply of fruit and wine available. Renly was casually eating a peach, leaning against the table in the center of the room. "I must give you credit, Robb. Your victory over the Kingslayer is fast becoming legend," he complimented. Robb grimaced. "Thank you, Renly. My only regret is that he was not stopped before he took the lives of two of my friends." Loras snorted. "Fools," he said quietly. Robb rounded on him. "If you have something to say, speak or be silent," he growled. Loras raised an eyebrow. "The Kingslayer is one of the most dangerous men in Westeros. I am merely pointing out that it was foolish of them to attack the men in the first place." Robb gripped the hilt of claw. "They died protecting me," he snapped. "I will not allow their memories to be sullied by some southern knight who has never stepped foot on the battlefield." Loras shot to his feet, his hand quickly falling to his blade. "Watch your tongue, Stark," he hissed. When the knight got to his feet, Greywind stepped forward, snarling at him. Loras's gaze switched between Robb and the giant wolf, holding his ground. "You will apologize, or leave my presence," Robb said, remaining where he was. Loras glanced at Renly, who was watching the verbal battle with a worried look. He nodded towards Robb. "Apologize, Loras," he ordered. Loras went red in the face, but managed to grit out an apology. "Forgive me, Lord Stark." Robb glared at him but nodded. "Forgiven," he grunted. Greywind backed away also, but continued to stare at the Silver Knight. "I assume you're here for a reason, Robb," Renly asked, changing the subject. "I'm intrigued to know why." "I want to offer an alliance between us," Robb said, getting right to the point. "With the combined might of your army here in the south and my army in the north, we can crush Tywin and Joffrey between us." "And Stannis?" Renly asked. "Should you need my help with your brother, then I will do what I can," Robb answered evenly. "Renly, I will not mince words. I have no wish to sit on the Iron Throne. That uncomfortable piece of pig iron is all yours. All I want is independence for my people as well as my family back." Loras was beginning to get on Robb's nerve as he spoke up again. Independence? Independence for what? Robb crossed his arms. The North and the Riverlands have made me their king, he declared, pointing at the crown hidden amongst his curls. I would have them be independent of the Iron Throne. Renly frowned slightly. You know that it would be hard for me to give up 2 kingdoms, especially when one is the size of all the other 6 kingdoms combined. Robb shrugged. Those are my terms. Sir Loras leaned forward in his chair. Who says we need your help, Stark? He challenged. After all, we have 100,000 men. Robb looked at the knight. And have done what with those 100,000? Robb snapped. My men and I have been killing Lannisters while you've sat here feasting and fooling around. How many battles have you fought in Heir? You earned your title through tournaments. I earned mine through war. To answer your question, no, I don't think you need my help. But do not be surprised when I take King's Landing before you even leave the Reach. Then my terms will not be so friendly. Loras's face grew red as his hand to the hilt of his sword, but Robb was ready for him, his own hand resting easily on his hilt. Renly stepped in again, this time more quickly, trying to diffuse the tension between the young wolf and Knight of Flowers. You make a compelling case, Robb, Renly said, forcing Robb to give his attention to the youngest Baratheon rather than his arrogant good brother. Give me a few days to think about it. I will give you one, Renly, Robb said, shaking his head. I have already been away from my men for longer than I want to. I will give you until tomorrow night to make your decision. If you do not have one, then I will leave assuming that I will not have your support. When I return to Riverrun, I will bring the war to Tywin and his grandson. When I am victorious, I will watch as you and your brother fight like children over a throne I possess. Renly tapped his chin thoughtfully, walking around the table. Robb had made a compelling case to him. So far, the young wolf had proven to be a bigger threat than anyone could have imagined, outmaneuvering Tywin Lannister and capturing the Kingslayer in a dazzling display of daring strategy. While Renly's army made him a threat, the Lannisters were being forced to deal with the rampaging Northmen in the Riverlands before they could turn their attention to the south. Renly sighed, nodding. I will give you my answer tomorrow night, he promised. Robb nodded as well and marched out of the tent, Grey Wind at his heels. As soon as he exited the tent, he noticed 2 men, nearly giants, standing next to his companions. As he got closer, one bowed to him. He then realized that they were twins, each with flaming red hair, large noses and grizzled beards. They wore a combination of leather and steel armor, and had long swords at their waists. King Robb, the one on the right, spoke, his voice deep and booming. Lady Olenna has requested your presence. Robb raised an eyebrow but nodded. He turned to Small John. Talk to the steward and find a place to set up camp. We leave the day after tomorrow. No exceptions, he ordered. Umber nodded and walked off, the others following him. Robb then nodded to the twin giants. Lead on.